Chapter 23:20. Trial. Zhuowen's gaze landed on Yao Xiangjuan, who had been completely frozen in time. Even though this beautiful woman had been completely frozen in time, she still gave off a soul-stirring beauty. Coupled with the helplessness and fear in Yao Xiangjuan's eyes, it was very easy to arouse a man's desire to protect her. "Senior, are they all dead?" Zhuowen asked in a heavy voice. The head shook its head and said indifferently, "They've been frozen in time. In that time, they've become eternal, but they haven't died. Of course, their current state is no different from being dead." Zhuowen sighed gently when he heard that. He could tell from the mysterious head that Yao Xiangjuan had only been frozen in time by the terrifying laws of spacetime. Her life was not in danger. Of course, if Yao Xiangjuan and the others remained like that, they would be no different from being dead. However, in Zhuowen's opinion, that was much better than being dead. Since their lives were not in danger, it was possible for them to recover. However, it was basically impossible for them to come back from the dead. "By the way, Senior, what's the trial you mentioned before?" Zhuowen suddenly asked. The head sneered, "I'd advise you not to set your sights on the spacetime key. The trial on the spacetime key is not something a brat like you can pass. You might even lose your life when the time comes." With that, the head said earnestly, "Come back when you're stronger. At that time, I'll directly teleport you here for you to undergo the trial." However, Zhuowen shook his head and said, "Senior, I'm determined to obtain the spacetime key this time. I can't afford to lose it." Zhuowen knew very well that the reason why the mysterious head was suddenly so concerned about him was because it wanted to rely on Zhuowen to retrieve its left eye and heart. This time, the spacetime key was closely related to the mysterious head. If Zhuowen did not take advantage of this relationship, he would really be a blockhead. The head's eyes narrowed slightly. He was no fool and naturally knew what Zhuowen was planning. However, it didn't care. The only thing it cared about was its missing left eye and heart. The white-clothed young man in front of it was the only person who knew the whereabouts of its left eye and heart. Naturally, it wouldn't miss such a good opportunity. If Senior can help me obtain the spacetime key, Junior is willing to go through fire and water to obtain Senior's left eye and heart. Zhuowen cupped his fists. The head's gaze relaxed, but it quickly became serious. "The spacetime key is not under my control. It was left behind by the master of the spacetime temple. The trial was also set up by the master of the spacetime temple. Even the entire river of spacetime quicksand was created by the master of the spacetime temple. If I was at my peak, it would be possible for me to break through the methods of the temporal temple's master and help you obtain the temporal key. Unfortunately, in my current state." When the mysterious head said this, it laughed at itself and shook its head. Its eyes were filled with helplessness. Zhuowen sighed inwardly. Although he had guessed that the mysterious head did not have absolute control over the spacetime key, he did not expect that the mysterious head would be completely useless. Thinking of this, Zhuowen secretly admired the master of the spacetime temple. He was certain that the master of the spacetime temple was definitely a Dao-proving realm expert. Moreover, he was one of the more powerful Dao-proving realm experts. When the mysterious head saw the dimness in Zhuowen's eyes, it immediately snorted coldly and said, "Do you think I'm completely useless to the spacetime key? If that's what you think, then you're gravely mistaken." Zhuowen's eyes lit up and he hurriedly said, "Senior, can you help me obtain the spacetime key?" The mysterious head said indifferently, "You'll have to rely on yourself. However, I can suppress a portion of the trial's power and make it less difficult for you to enter. That way, your chances of passing the trial will be much higher." Zhuowen's expression was calm. He knew that the mysterious head would not help him out of the kindness of its heart. There was definitely a condition, and Zhuowen could roughly guess the condition. "As a condition of the deal, you need to find my left eye and heart for me in the future and swear an oath to the heavenly Tao. If you break the oath, may the heavens and earth destroy you, your soul will be destroyed, and you will never be able to reincarnate." When the mysterious head said this, it looked at Zhuowen and a faint killing intent emanated from the head. Then, like a raging wave, it began to grow stronger and stronger. In the end, it was all applied to Zhuowen. Zhuowen was barely able to resist this killing intent, and his countenance was pale like snow while his entire body trembled. He was very clearly aware that this mysterious head was forcefully pressuring him, and if he didn't tactfully agree this time, then this mysterious head would definitely not let him off. "Don't worry, senior. I agree to your condition." Yuan clasped his fist. Before a terrifying expert like the mysterious head, Yuan did not dare to play any tricks. Instead, he agreed without hesitation. Only after Yuan agreed did the terrifying killing intent from the mysterious head gradually recede. Yuan sighed gently. "I'll give you 100 years. If you don't bring my left eye and heart in 100 years, I think you know the consequences," the mysterious head sneered. The mysterious head laughed coldly. Soon after, a bloody glow flashed in its eyes. Soon after, it drew a complicated array in the air and imprinted it on Zhuo Wen's forehead. Yuan could not resist at all. The mysterious head was far stronger than him. Even if he wanted to resist, the aura of the mysterious head suppressed him to the point that he could not move at all. He could only passively accept the blood-red formation drawn by the mysterious head. When the blood-red array formation entered his forehead, Zhuo Wen knew that this was a seal that the mysterious head had placed on him. For the next 100 years, he, Zhuo Wen, would be completely fine. However, if he still did not come looking for the mysterious head after 100 years and did not bring back the left eye and heart as promised, then Zhuo Wen's death would come. When the blood-red formation was completely imprinted in the depths of Zhuo Wen's sea of consciousness, Zhuo Wen slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was as calm as an ancient well. He was not as angry as the mysterious head had imagined. "You have a good temperament." The mysterious head gave a rare compliment. "You want to see me roar in anger? So what if I'm angry? Will you remove the seed you planted in me?" Zhuo Wen said indifferently. The mysterious head snickered and said, "So you're going to accept your fate?" Zhuo Wen shook his head and said, "I'm not accepting my fate. I'm just acknowledging our cooperation. Since we're working together, even if you didn't plant the seed in me, I would still bring back your left eye and heart. Of course, since you want to plant the seed in me, it's only natural to have an extra layer of protection." Chapter 23-21. Comprehension, let's cut the crap. "Senior, please give me some pointers on the trial of the space-time key," Zhuo Wen said indifferently. The mysterious head nodded and stopped talking nonsense. Instead, it looked at the bottom of the cliff and said indifferently, "The space-time key is buried at the bottom of the cliff. When you dig out the bottom of the cliff, the trial will begin. However, I have to tell you that the trial is very dangerous. If you fail, you will end up like these people. You will be frozen in time forever, like a living dead." As it said that, the mysterious head looked at the area where time was frozen like a world of ice and snow. The cultivators there were frozen in time. "Let's begin." Zhuo Wen did not want to waste time, so he interrupted the mysterious head. The mysterious head was not annoyed. It quietly watched Zhuo Wen head to the bottom of the cliff. When Zhuo Wen's right hand landed on the bottom of the cliff, he immediately sensed that the bottom of the cliff possessed the laws of space and time that caused him to tremble in fear. It was like a storm that poured down on him. The power of the laws of space-time was extremely powerful. It was far more powerful than the other areas of the ocean. Under the influence of the laws of space-time, Zhuo Wen felt like every inch of his skin and flesh was constantly dislocated. It was as if he would collapse at any moment. Don't resist. This is the suction force that will bring you into the trial. The more you resist, the stronger the suction force will be. When the time comes, you might be torn to pieces by the suction force. Just as Zhuo Wen was struggling to resist the sudden suction force, the mysterious head's voice slowly echoed in Zhuo Wen's mind. Zhuo Wen took a deep breath when he heard that. He completely gave up resisting, and the power of the laws of space-time flowed into Zhuo Wen's body. Afterward, Zhuo Wen discovered that the power of the laws of space-time did not bring him the pain he expected. Instead, there was a trace of comfort, and he disappeared from the spot. When Zhuo Wen opened his eyes again, he discovered that everything before him had changed greatly. There was no longer the ocean before him, nor was there a cliff buried at the bottom of the sea. There was no bloody mysterious head. What appeared before Zhuo Wen was an extremely long plank road. The plank road was completely made of wood. Below the plank road was the boundless ocean. Moreover, the ocean was gray, which made it look particularly strange. Zhuowen's gaze fell on the end of the plank road. The plank road extended into the depths of the ocean. At the end of the plank road was a red sunset. The warm glow of the sunset sprinkled on the horizon, adding a trace of color and vitality to the originally lifeless gray ocean. Walk on the plank road and comprehend the sunset that is about to disappear. Otherwise, you will never be able to leave this place. An indifferent voice slowly resounded through the world. The voice was very unfamiliar, completely different from the voice of the mysterious head. Zhuan knew that the owner of the voice was someone else. Furthermore, it was very likely that it had been left behind by the so-called master of the temporal temple. Zhuan pondered for a moment. The moment the voice that resounded in the world faded away, he took large strides forward. Zhuan's speed was neither fast nor slow. He did not forcefully increase his speed for the sake of speed. Instead, he ran forward as if he was chasing after his life. Just like that, Zhuan walked on the plank road for 10 days. However, during these 10 days, it was as if Zhuan was walking on the spot. Let alone comprehend the sunset, it was impossible for him to even approach it. On the contrary, it was more like he was walking on the spot. Zhuan did not panic. He had encountered this situation in the ocean before. This was a trial stage set up by the master of the temporal temple. The laws of space-time here were much stronger than in the ocean. Back then, Zhuowen's laws of space-time had not reached the threshold, so he could only gradually lose himself in the ocean. It was only when he reached the threshold of the laws of space-time that he finally approached the sunset and arrived at the edge of the heartbroken cliff. However, the laws of space-time here were much more terrifying. If Zhuan did not want to lose himself here, he could only further comprehend the laws of space-time. Only by absorbing the power of the laws of space-time could Zhuowen fight poison with poison. Zhuowen sighed softly. In the end, he took out the space-time force that he had fused with the laws of space and time on the heavenly armor continent. Although his laws of space-time had reached the threshold, it was simply impossible for him to obtain the space-time force. At least for the time being, it was unlikely that Zhuowen would be able to obtain the space-time force. However, Zhuowen now possessed the sliver of space-time force he had obtained on the heavenly armor continent. Coupled with the fact that Zhuowen had already reached the threshold of the laws of space-time, Zhuowen was able to use the sliver of space-time force much more easily. Zhuowen continued forward this time, and the sliver of space-time force lingered around him at all times. With the protection of the sliver of space-time force, Zhuowen found that the space-time suppression of this place was no longer so powerful and terrifying. Zhuowen continued forward. The plank road was no longer as illusory and vague as before. Instead, it was real. At least now, Zhuowen was constantly moving forward, constantly approaching the sunset at the end. When Zhuowen finally reached the end of the plank road, Zhuowen had already become an old man with a head full of white hair. He had sunk into his twilight years, just like the beautiful sunset floating above the sea, about to fall and disappear. Zhuowen had a feeling that if the setting sun at the end of the horizon really fell, his life would end just like the setting sun. That mysterious head said that I have to comprehend the sunset when I enter this place, but it didn't ask me to comprehend the laws of space-time. Zhuowen seemed to have caught on to something as he secretly considered what the mysterious head had said to him. His gaze was fixed on the beautiful sunset at the end of the horizon as he gradually fell into a state of absent-mindedness. And the moment Zhuowen came to the end of the plank road, the originally motionless sunset began to slowly fall. Although it was very slow, Zhuowen could feel that the sunset was indeed falling. At this speed, he would probably be completely submerged in the sea very soon. Zhuowen sat down cross-legged. He stared at the setting sun in a daze, but his heart was extremely calm. Even though he could clearly sense that his life was gradually fading away as the sun set in the west, he was still calm. When the sunset finally fell into the sea and the entire sea sank into darkness, Zhuowen slowly closed his eyes. His vitality was completely severed as if he had completely died with the sunset. The endless darkness lasted for a long time. Then, at the end of the darkness, a rising sun appeared again. This rising sun was filled with vigor and vitality, as if it was fearless. At the end of the plank road, A figure silently sat cross-legged. This was a figure that could not be any older. The moment the sun rose, the white-haired old man suddenly moved. He slowly raised his head and looked at the rising sun as an indescribable emotion appeared at the corner of his mouth. The true power of space-time is hidden in this sunrise and sunset. Chapter 23-22. The waning sun at sea. The sun rose and set, and the sun came and went. On the vast surface of the sea, a boundless plank road stretched out at the end of the sea. At the end of the plank road, a figure with a straight back sat quietly with his legs crossed. Regardless of whether the sun rose from the east or the setting sun set in the west, the figure sat there motionlessly, as if he had passed away. The only change was that between sunrise and sunset, the hair that draped over his shoulders constantly changed between black and white, as if he was returning to his youth and returning to his old age. Zhuan sat quietly at the end of the plank road. He seemed to have forgotten how long he had been sitting there. He only knew that his life force was constantly being created and destroyed between sunrise and sunset. This feeling was not pleasant. However, Zhuan knew that this was the only way he could fully comprehend the setting sun hanging high above the sea. Another setting sun slowly set from the sea. When this setting sun was almost halfway below the sea, Zhuan suddenly stood up. A poem involuntarily appeared in his mind. A setting sun spreads across the water. Half the river is red, half the river is red. Just as he finished reciting, Zhuan waved his sleeve. Immediately, the setting sun that had fallen below the sea stopped at this moment. Setting sun on the sea, time and space. Zhuan muttered in a low voice. As if he had caught onto something, the understanding in his eyes became even more intense. On the surface of the sea, sunrise and sunset represented the passage of time, and also the movement of space. The usual sunrise and sunset became so profound and mysterious in Zhuan's eyes at this moment. Zhuan waved his sleeve again, and the originally still setting sun slowly fell below the surface of the sea. In the end, the entire sea fell into darkness. Zhuan sat cross-legged in the darkness, but his eyes emitted a frightening light. The rising sun rose at sunrise, and the setting sun set at sunset. This was the law of nature. Zhuan, on the other hand, wanted to do the opposite. When the sun rose, the setting sun would rise, allowing the beauty of the sunset and the vitality of the sunrise to combine together. The energy produced by such a clash would be extremely terrifying. Of course, all of this was Zhuan's imagination. When he had first entered this place, the voice had said something ambiguous, telling him to comprehend the setting sun. There were no specific requirements for comprehending the sunset. Zhuan knew that the key was to comprehend it. No matter what you comprehended, as long as you could comprehend something from this beautiful sunrise and sunset, Zhuan knew that you would be able to leave this place. Taking a deep breath, Zhuan began to use the sliver of space-time force in his body. He knew that although there was not much space-time force, Zhuan had a little grasp of the space-time law, so he could unleash the strongest power of this sliver of space-time force. Thinking up to here, Zhuan's right hand formed a sword finger and suddenly pointed out in the air. Instantly, waves of mysterious energy actually suffused out from the area around his fingertips, spreading out in circles. At the very front of the plank road, the dark sea suddenly erupted with endless splashes of water. Following that, the splashes of water began to condense and soar into the sky, as if something was about to break out from the bottom of the sea. The splashes of water became more and more violent. Following that, a ray of light overflowed from the dark sea. The light was not intense, but it had a kind of beauty to it. But finally, the light became even more exuberant. The surroundings were dyed dark red, and a huge setting sun slowly rose from the sea. The setting sun emitted a red light, and the afterglow dyed the white clouds in the sky red, making the white clouds in the sky look like they were on fire. It was dazzling and wonderful. Zhuan looked at the setting sun that rose again, and there was a sense of excitement and heroism in his heart. He knew that after sitting for countless days, he had finally comprehended the true essence of the setting sun, and relied on the space-time force to create his own divine ability. It should be known that a self-created divine ability was much more powerful than a divine ability learned from others. This was because a self-created divine ability was completely compatible with one's body and could unleash its greatest power. Moreover, a self-created divine ability could be used continuously as one's cultivation base increased, and its power would continue to increase. It could be used continuously, and it would not be eliminated. After all, as Zhuan continued to cultivate and improve, he could continuously perfect the power of the self-created divine ability, making it more compatible with him. In the future, this divine ability will be called the ocean's waning sun. The corner of Zhuo Wen's mouth revealed a trace of a happy smile. He had always wanted to create a divine ability of his own, but how could it be so easy to create a divine ability? If it weren't for the trial arranged by the space-time temple's master, Zhuan wouldn't have been able to comprehend this divine ability through the space-time force. The moment the setting sun rose to its highest point, the vast sea under the setting sun suddenly boiled, and terrifying giant dragons appeared. It was as if 10,000 dragons were rushing out of the sea. The scene was extremely spectacular. Zhuan stood on the plank road with his hands behind his back. His eyes revealed a smile as he quietly admired the raging sea. He was very satisfied with the power of the ocean's waning Sunday. He knew that once this divine ability was used, it would be enough to fight against a half-step void sky ninth-step cultivator. Moreover, as Zhuowen's comprehension of the space-time law deepened, the power of his divine ability would only become stronger and more terrifying. At that time, he believed that it would be comparable to the void sky ninth-step heavenly Tao law. This is the bottom of the sea? When the endless sea water went crazy because of the setting sun, the bottom of the sea gradually emerged. Zhuowen's gaze involuntarily fell on the bottom of the sea. When he saw the sparkling and translucent crystals exposed on the bottom of the sea, his eyes suddenly became blazing and excited. This was because these crystals were all time and space crystals. These two kinds of crystals were extremely rare in the time and space law areas, but there were actually countless of them at the bottom of the sea. They were like countless pebbles in a stream, densely packed together. There are so many time and space crystals. Zhuo Wen's eyes burned with passion. Without even thinking, he flew down, and his divine sense transformed into a giant hand that reached the heavens, grabbing at the crystals without hesitation. Zhuo Wen's speed of grabbing the crystals was extremely fast. Each time, he would grab hundreds or thousands of crystals. However, there were too many crystals here. Compared to all the crystals on the bottom of the sea, the crystals he grabbed were simply a drop in the ocean. When the setting sun gradually disappeared, the raging sea water calmed down again, and the exposed bottom of the sea was completely submerged by the seawater. Zhuan returned to the plank road before the sea calmed down. Zhuan's face was slightly pale. The ocean's waning sun consumed a lot of his energy. This time, he had just comprehended this divine ability, so he could only use it once at most. He couldn't use it continuously. Chapter 23:23. Frog-headed monster. It would be perfect if I could get all the crystals at the bottom of the sea. Zhuan sighed with some regret. Of course, all of this was just Zhuowen's fantasy. The number of crystals at the bottom of the sea had reached a terrifying level. Even without the obstruction of the sea, Zhuan would probably need a few months to collect them all. However, Zhuan was quite satisfied with the harvest this time. In just a short period of time, Zhuan had collected over 10,000 crystals. If this was in the outside world, it would cause a huge sensation. I've already comprehended my own divine ability. This trial should be considered passed, right? Zhuan took out a praying mat. After recuperating for a while, he stood up again and looked around at the quiet sea. He frowned slightly. He felt that the surroundings were too quiet. There was no movement at all. But just as Zhuan was puzzled, an extremely ear-piercing sound of water suddenly appeared on the calm sea surface. Then, a huge whirlpool appeared on the surface of the water 1,000 miles in front of the plank road. This whirlpool was dark and it was impossible to see what was inside. Zhuan stood on the plank road and silently looked at the whirlpool in the water. After waiting for a while, he found that there was no creature or monster coming out of the whirlpool. He frowned and muttered to himself in a low voice, "Could this be the entrance to a certain place?" Zhuowen's guess was not without reason. After the whirlpool appeared in the water, Yuan clearly felt that there was a teleportation power in the whirlpool. Clearly, this whirlpool was a teleportation array. However, Yuan was hesitant about whether he should enter the whirlpool or not. After waiting for a while, Yuan confirmed that this whirlpool was indeed not dangerous. He took a step with his right foot and jumped into the depths of the whirlpool. Soon he disappeared inside. After Yuan disappeared into the whirlpool, the eyes of the mysterious head in the outside world flickered. Its gaze landed on a figure in front of it. This figure was emitting a strange glow. Not bad. To think that he would be able to comprehend the laws of spacetime. This fellow is much stronger than those trash from before. Although I have lowered the difficulty of the trial by a little, it was still not easy to pass. For this kid to be able to pass, it goes to show how strong his talent is. The mysterious head mumbled to itself, and the figure that its gaze fell upon was actually Jun. However, at this moment, Yuan landed not far away from Yao Xiangjuan. His surroundings were frozen by ice. He was motionless and his expression was serene. Clearly, Yuan was also frozen in time. However, the only difference between him and the others was that his body emitted a strange light, while the others did not. The mysterious head knew that this light represented that Zhuowen's soul had not yet been lost in the trial. Once this child was completely lost, the strange light would also disappear, and Zhuowen would never be able to return. This time, what entered the trial was not Zhuowen's physical body, but Zhuowen's soul. The mysterious head did not tell Zhuowen this. It knew that if it told Zhuowen, it would only cause the latter to have more worries. Thus, it might as well keep it from Zhuowen. After entering the trial, Zhuowen's soul would leave, but his physical body would be frozen in time for eternity. Only if he passed the trial would the time freeze disappear. At that time, Zhuowen would also completely obtain the spacetime key. Zhuowen opened his eyes and found that he was still on a plank road in front of him. The surroundings were misty white, but Zhuowen knew that this plank road should also be built in a sea. This was because he heard the sound of crashing water and waves. Zhuowen did not know where this place was, but he knew that the only thing he could do now was to move forward. He knew that the road ahead would definitely have the answer he wanted. This place also had the spacetime constraint, but it did not have much effect on Zhuowen now. After all, he had comprehended a part of the spacetime law and also had a trace of the power of spacetime. He had also created the sun waning above the sea. The spacetime constraint had long lost any effect on him. After Zhuowen slowly disappeared into the fog, a head poked out from under the plank road where Zhuowen had just been. This head looked like a frog with a pair of round eyes. It stared in the direction that Zhuowen had left and sneered, "Another one has come to die. This guy's soul looks quite delicious. Perhaps Sir will like it. I'll go inform him first." After saying that, the monster slowly dived into the water and left. Zhuowen walked for 3 hours and finally found that the surrounding fog had gradually thinned out. At the same time, he noticed that in the distance, he saw the outline of an island. Looking at the outline, the island was not big, but Yun smelled an ominous premonition from the island. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, there was the sound of water splashing, and then a series of fierce black shadows swept toward Yun at an extremely fast speed. Zhuowen took a deep breath and immediately took out the Emperor's sword. The Emperor's sword in his right hand abruptly swept out, and in an instant, the sword light turned into a waterfall that connected the heavens and the earth. It actually laid across Zhuowen's body, turning into a revolving barrier. Bang, bang, bang. A series of sounds like hailstones were heard, and then Zhuowen discovered that these black shadows were actually fist-sized ice cubes. To be more precise, these were not ice cubes, but fist-sized water droplets frozen at a certain point in time by the space-time law. These water droplets contained the space-time law, and if one was hit by them, it would not feel good. Zhuowen swung his sword again and again, barely managing to block the ice that fell like raindrops. His gaze also noticed his surroundings, and he discovered that numerous heads had emerged from the surface of the sea. They were densely packed together. These heads were very strange. They were shaped like frog heads, and their fan-like palms grabbed the seawater around them and threw it towards Zhuowen. Zhuowen blocked the falling ice cubes around him, but his eyes revealed a look of shock. He knew very well that the sea below the plank road was eternally frozen at a certain point in time by the space-time law, just like ice cubes. No creature could travel through such seawater, and basically all of them were frozen at the bottom of the sea. However, these countless frog-headed monsters that appeared in front of him not only traveled through the sea, but also grabbed the frozen seawater and threw it at him. How could Juan not be shocked? Fortunately, these frog-headed monsters were not strong, and there were no energy fluctuations on their bodies. It seemed that they only knew how to use brute force. However, Juan did not dare to be careless because these monsters had a natural advantage. Their bodies contained the space-time law, so they could freely travel through this strange sea and use the space-time water to attack. If an ordinary cultivator was hit by so much space-time water, they would undoubtedly die, but Juan was not so bad. After all, he had comprehended a part of the space-time law. At most, he would be a little embarrassed. Sword Dragon slashes the sky. Juan knew that if he kept defending, he would lose, so he had to take the initiative to attack. Otherwise, these monsters would definitely exhaust his strength. Juan swung his sword, and suddenly, the soaring sword chi intertwined with each other and condensed into a huge dragon above Juan. Chapter 23-24. Island Boom. 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 The sword dragon swept out with a terrifying aura. The attention of the frog-headed monsters, who were originally focused on Juan, was immediately diverted by the sword dragon. Then, some of the frog-headed monsters immediately grabbed the space-time seawater around them and threw it at the sword dragon. In less than 10 breaths, the imposing sword dragon was completely defeated by the attacks of the frog-headed monsters. Juan knew how powerful the frog-headed monsters were, so he naturally did not place his hopes on the sword dragon. His main purpose was to attract the attention of the frog-headed monsters, and he had achieved his goal. Juan waved his right hand, and immediately, the Blood Immortal Sword and the Thunder Fire Sword were summoned. As soon as the two divine swords appeared, under Juan's signal, they rushed out and swept toward the distracted frog-headed monsters. As for the space-time rules here, although it affected the Blood Immortal Sword and the Thunder Fire Sword, Juan used time and space crystals to refine a simple formation and arranged it on the two divine swords. Therefore, although the space-time rules could affect the two divine swords, it was not to the extent of making it difficult for the two divine swords to move. Puchi. The Thunder Fire Sword and the Blood Immortal Sword grasped the timing just right. Before the frog-headed monsters could recover from their focus on the sword dragon, the two divine swords began to kill them. For a moment, blood splattered everywhere, and the frog-headed monsters were killed by the two divine swords. Their blood flowed like a river. The two divine swords immediately attracted the attention of the other frog-headed monsters, who were attacking Juan. Then, the frog-headed monsters roared angrily and threw the space-time seawater in their hands at the two divine swords, trying to stop the two divine swords from killing. Juan's mouth revealed a mocking smile. After the rest of the frog-headed monster's attention was attracted by the Blood Immortal Sword and the Thunder Fire Sword, his burden was immediately relieved. Soul kill! Juan growled, and his consciousness immediately scattered countless needle-like objects, which then turned into rain and fell densely. In an instant, more than half of the frog-headed monsters were killed by soul kill. The remaining frog-headed monsters reacted quickly and immediately dove into the sea to avoid the disaster. Juan looked at the calm sea and smiled. He put away the Blood Immortal Sword and the Thunder Fire Sword and walked toward the island along the plank road. When Juan arrived near the island, he finally got a clear view of the island. The island was not big, and it was full of bony rocks. At a glance, it was impossible to see any green plants. The entire island was lifeless and lifeless. Juan's divine sense was extremely powerful. Although he was still some distance away from the island, his divine sense had already swept into the island, allowing him to see the whole picture of the island. There's actually someone here? Juan raised his eyebrows. Just now, when his divine sense entered the island, he actually found 3 people on the island. These 3 people were all men. 2 of them were younger, and the last one looked like a middle-aged man in his 40s. However, Juan found that these 3 people were sitting in the stone hall, drinking to drown their sorrows. They looked extremely dispirited. Third brother, how long have we been trapped here? The middle-aged man picked up a jug of wine and looked at the black-clothed young man who was holding his cheek and asked with drunken eyes. The black-clothed young man looked at the middle-aged man and said with a self-deprecating smile, "Big brother, I don't know how long we've been trapped here. I only know that it's been so long that I don't have any concept of time." The blue-clothed young man sitting opposite the middle-aged man picked up a jug of wine and took a big gulp. Then, he threw the jug on the ground, his eyes full of determination. "I don't want to be a coward anymore. Big brother, third brother, there are only 3 of us left on this island. Are we going to be cowards like this forever?" The blue-clothed young man said with a murderous look. The middle-aged man said bitterly, "Second brother, don't be so impulsive. Are you going to face that monster? You know, once we're killed by that monster, we'll die directly. Our souls and divine souls will be annihilated. There's no chance of survival. But what's the difference between this and death? I'd rather die than live like a coward." After the blue-clothed young man finished speaking, he took a step forward and rushed toward the plank road outside the island. However, the blue-clothed young man didn't rush out for long before he was stopped by the middle-aged man and the black-clothed young man. "Second brother, don't be impulsive. We still have hope. As long as a monster enters the trial and successfully passes it, then we'll be saved. If you rush out now, you'll only be throwing your life away. Even if someone passes the trial in the future, you won't have a chance to live." The middle-aged man advised earnestly. The black-clothed young man also hurriedly advised, "Second brother, big brother is right. We can only continue to wait. It's not worth it for you to go out and throw your life away." On the plank road, Zhuowen's eyes flickered. From the words of the 3 people, Zhuowen heard a lot of information. It seemed that the 3 of them were trapped here, and the 3 of them seemed to be very afraid of the things on the plank road. However, there were only those frog-headed monsters on the plank road. These frog-headed monsters were nothing to Zhuowen, so why were the 3 of them so afraid? Moreover, the strength of the 3 of them wasn't bad. If they were able to enter the island before, then they must have fought with these frog-headed monsters. There was no need to be so afraid, right? But just as Zhuowen was walking and pondering about the 3 people on the island, a thunderous sound of water breaking came, and then a huge shadow appeared on the left side of the plank road. The shadow jumped out, and then countless space-time water droplets rushed out, turning into water arrows that rushed toward Zhuowen. Zhuowen's eyes changed, and an ominous feeling suddenly arose. He immediately took out the Emperor's sword, and a sword light burst out, turning into a thick barrier. Unfortunately, the barrier didn't last long before it completely collapsed. Zhuowen had no choice but to take out the phagocytosis. The phagocytosis immediately grew to a size of 100 feet, like a unique huge rock, blocking in front of Zhuowen and blocking all the water arrows. At this moment, Zhuowen discovered that the thing in front of him was a huge frog-headed monster. This frog-headed monster was much bigger than the ones he had encountered before. It was 1,000 feet in size. Zhuowen stood in front of this frog-headed monster, as if he was facing a mountain. He seemed insignificant and unreachable. The moment this huge frog-headed monster appeared, small frog-headed monsters immediately drilled out of the surrounding sea. These frog-headed monsters looked at Zhuowen with strong killing intent. Obviously, Zhuowen had killed so many of their companions that these frog-headed monsters completely hated him. Chapter 23-25. Temporal Frog King. What's going on? The Temporal Frog King has appeared. Could it be that a new challenger has appeared? The 3 of them looked at each other in dismay. Soon after, joy appeared in their eyes as they rushed out of the island and arrived at its edge. Soon after, the 3 of them saw a white-clothed young man standing on a plank road a few thousand meters away from the island with a huge phagocytosis floating in front of him. Opposite the white-clothed young man was a huge frog-headed monster and a group of smaller frog-headed monsters. What did this guy do? Normally, the Temporal Frog King won't appear when challengers enter the first island. Only those who plan to return the way they came and fail will attract the Temporal Frog King. The middle-aged man's gaze changed slightly as he looked at the huge Temporal Frog King. His body trembled slightly as he muttered in a low voice. Obviously, he was extremely afraid of the Temporal Frog King. It's only the Void Sky 7th step? With such a weak cultivation, this kid will definitely die. The black-clothed man shook his head and said helplessly. On the other hand, the blue-clothed man held a wine pot in his hand as he silently looked at the white-clothed young man standing with a sword. He saw a supreme confidence in the white-clothed young man. This temperament could only be possessed by a true powerhouse. The white-clothed young man's cultivation wasn't high. He was only at the Void Sky 7th step, but he actually had such a temperament. Clearly, this kid wasn't simple. I'll go help him, the blue-clothed man said as he leaped out and left the island. He was so fast that the middle-aged man and the black-clothed man couldn't react at all. Second brother, you? The middle-aged man was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. He also wanted to follow, but after looking at the huge Temporal Frog King and the densely packed temporal frogs around it, the impulse in his heart immediately calmed down. The arrival of the blue-clothed man immediately attracted the attention of the Temporal Frog King and Juan. Juan looked at the blue-clothed man in surprise. How could he not see that the blue-clothed man had come to save him? He didn't expect that there would be such a warm-hearted person in the cold and ruthless world of cultivators. Friend, I am Xiao Lang. This light frog king is not easy to deal with. Xiao Lang is not talented, so I will lend you a hand. Before the man in blue could finish speaking, the sound of something breaking through the air could be heard. The time frogs covering the time frog king threw out space-time water droplets at the man in blue. The expression of the blue-clothed man changed drastically. With a flick of his finger, he took out a long spear. He held the handle of the spear with both hands and suddenly swung it. Immediately, many spear shadows rushed out and blocked all the water droplets that were thrown over. Juan took a deep look at the blue-robed man. This guy was very strong. He was definitely an expert at the peak of the Void Sky 8 steps. Boom. Unfortunately, the blue-clothed man had just blocked that attack when an even more ferocious attack came rushing over from behind. For a moment, the pressure on the blue-robed man increased greatly. Cold sweat dripped down his forehead, and his face turned pale. Thank you, Brother Xiao. You should go back first. I will deal with this light frog king. Juan smiled slightly. Xiao Lang's eyes flickered. Just as he was about to speak, a space-time water droplet broke through his defense and fiercely smashed into his chest. Then, Xiao Lang let out a muffled groan and was sent flying. At the same time, the following space-time water droplets swarmed over and smashed into Xiao Lang's body. The space-time water droplets were too terrifying. If so many space-time water droplets smashed into his body, Xiao Lang knew that he would die without a doubt. Second brother, you are too impulsive. With an explosive shout, the middle-aged man standing on the shore had unknowingly rushed to Xiao Lang's side. Then, the middle-aged man's right hand formed a palm and fiercely blasted out. Boom, boom, boom. An incomparably huge red palm rushed into the sky and blocked the space-time water droplets. The middle-aged man let out a muffled groan and spat out a mouthful of blood before bringing Xiao Lang to the shore. Puchi. After the middle-aged man put down Xiao Lang, he knelt on one knee on the ground and madly spat out blood. His face was extremely pale. Big brother. Xiao Lang crawled up from the ground and immediately went over to the middle-aged man's side to help him up, and his face was covered in shame. The middle-aged man shook his head to indicate that he was fine, and then he said in a low voice, Second brother, you are the strongest amongst us in terms of strength and natural talent. You have the best chance of leaving this place, so I can't allow you to die. Don't do anything stupid. When he spoke up to hear, the middle-aged man gazed at the white-clothed young man with a complicated expression and said, There's no need to pay any attention to him. His cultivation is too low. Unless he is able to comprehend the energy of the spatial laws, otherwise. The middle-aged man shook his head. Obviously, he didn't believe that Juan was able to comprehend the energy of space. The three of them had been trapped here for so long, yet none of them had been able to condense even a trace of the energy of space, let alone Juan who just entered this place. Big brother is right. Second brother, you can't give up. The black-clothed man hurriedly came over to Xiao Lang's side and persuaded. Xiao Lang sighed lightly and sat dejectedly on the ground. He'd suffered a great deal of injuries just now, but his face was slightly red, and he didn't dare look at the white-clothed young man. Earlier he'd solemnly vowed to save this young man, yet now he'd been pulled back by his big brother. So, those words of saving the young man were no different than a fart, and he was slightly unable to swallow his pride. Of course, he was even more unwilling to watch the white-clothed young man be killed by the Temporal Frog King before him. The Temporal Frog King glanced indifferently at Xiao Lang's group of three, and then it paid no further attention to them, and its enormous eyes descended onto Zhuan. "You're really bold. You actually killed many of my disciples. How do you want to die?" The Temporal Frog King's voice was deafening like thunder. Xiao Lang's group of three came to an understanding when they heard this. No wonder this kid would draw out the Temporal Frog King. It turned out that this kid had killed many temporal frogs. If this kid hadn't killed the temporal frogs and had merely charged through, the Temporal Frog King would absolutely not have appeared. Unfortunately, this kid didn't do that. However, this also caused Xiao Lang's group to have a whole new level of respect for him. Although the Temporal Frog's strength was far inferior to the Temporal Frog King, they'd always appeared in groups. This wasn't easy to deal with, let alone kill many temporal frogs. Yet this white-clothed young man was able to do it. Obviously, this white-clothed young man wasn't a simple person. Of course, although Xiao Lang's group of three thought highly of Zhuan, they still didn't think that Zhuan could survive the Temporal Frog King's attack. The terror of the Temporal Frog King had long been deeply imprinted in their minds after being trapped here for so long, and they were unable to extricate themselves from it for a long time. Zhuan naturally didn't know what Xiao Lang's group of three were thinking. He stood with his sword in hand, and a phagocytosis floated above his head. He looked indifferently at the Temporal Frog King and said, "Your disciples wanted to kill me. Could it be that I'm not allowed to retaliate?" "You're right. It doesn't matter if my disciples and grand-disciples kill you. However, it won't do if you kill my disciples and grand-disciples. The reason for that is because they are my disciples and grand-disciples." The Time Frog King spoke with overflowing killing intent. Zhuan sneered and said, "Are you that great? I feel that continuing to speak to a fellow who's about to die under my sword is simply a waste of time." Chapter 23-26. Divine Power Display. The Temporal Frog King was so angry that he laughed. He felt that the white-clothed young man in front of him was too arrogant. "Kill him!" The Temporal Frog King roared angrily. The temporal frogs around him threw out space-time water droplets, which bombarded Zhuan. Zhuan looked calm as he waved the Emperor Sword in his hand. At the same time, the Blood Immortal Sword and the Thunder Fire Sword turned into two streamers of light and floated beside Zhuan, helping Zhuan resist the dense space-time water droplets. For a moment, the two sides were in a stalemate. "Humph! You really have some skills." The Temporal Frog King sneered. He bounced his legs and jumped out of the water. Suddenly, thousands of waves surged out of the calm sea. It looked extremely spectacular. The lower jaw of the Time Frog King suddenly bulged, and then it spat out a huge water ball that was 1,000 feet in size from its mouth. The water bomb was extremely terrifying. The moment it was blasted out, the entire space-time sea began to distort and deform. The water bomb contained even more terrifying space-time rules. Boom! The water bomb blasted the phagocytosis. Then, the phagocytosis, which had an amazing defense, was blown away by the water bomb. It was on the verge of collapse. Obviously, it could not hold on for long. Bang! 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 The phagocytosis was on the verge of collapse under the attack of the water bomb. Obviously, the Temporal Frog King wanted to follow up with another attack. He once again bulged his lower jaw and spat out another water bomb. Boom! The phagocytosis was finally blown away by the attack of the two water bombs. The Blood Immortal Sword and the Thunder Fire Sword saw that the situation was not right and hid behind Zhuan. After Zhuan cursed the two guys, he immediately spat out a mouthful of blood on the phagocytosis. Suddenly, the power of the phagocytosis increased greatly. It barely blocked the attack of the Temporal Frog King. However, the Temporal Frog King's attack was too terrifying. Coupled with the attacks of the surrounding temporal frogs, Yuan immediately fell into an absolute disadvantage. He was suppressed and could be in danger at any time. The Temporal Frog King is too terrifying. This kid can't hold on for long. On the shore, the middle-aged man shook his head and sighed. His eyes were full of pity. He saw Zhuowen's battle just now and knew that the white-clothed young man in front of him was very powerful. But he was still no match for the Temporal Frog King. Xiao Lang's eyes were filled with guilt. Just now, he had solemnly vowed to help the white-clothed youth, but now, he could only watch as the white-clothed youth died at the hands of the Time Frog King. Boom! The Time Frog King was right in front of Zhuowen. Its gigantic palm leaf fan-like palm suddenly whizzed over and blasted towards Zhuowen. Gusts of violent wind swept up a terrifying storm, setting off huge waves that were like raging dragons. Frog? Zhuowen. The is that he it that frog that was that it? Was. The Temporal Frog King lived in the sea of time and space. If he wanted to hurt it, he would have to use the power of space-time law. Although Zhuowen had mastered a part of space-time law and his attack carried a small amount of space-time law, it only had some effect on the Temporal Frog King. It didn't have much effect on the Temporal Frog King. Waning son of the sea. Zhuowen stood in place and looked at the palm that was getting closer and closer. Then he pointed his right finger at the void. Suddenly, with Zhuowen as the center, an invisible energy ripple radiated out. Then the whole space seemed to have come to a standstill. The Temporal Frog King's palm also came to a complete stop at this moment. The seawater behind Zhuowen soared into the sky, forming countless water pillars. Then, behind the water pillars, a waning sun slowly rose. The red light reflected the sea and the sky, forming a rare and beautiful scene. Boom, boom, boom. The moment the waning sun rose, the Temporal Frog King's palm exploded. Terrifying energy swept out, causing the Temporal Frog King to cry out and retreat repeatedly. Moreover, as the waning sun continued to rise, the power became more and more terrifying. The Temporal Frog King's huge body kept exploding, and blood spurted out like rain. It looked extremely miserable. It wasn't just the Temporal Frog King. Wherever the waning sun shone, terrifying energy would set off. The densely packed temporal frogs all exploded into clouds of blood mist under the power of the waning sun. When the waning sun rose to the highest point, the Temporal Frog King wailed, and its huge body exploded into a huge cloud of blood mist. In the end, its face was blurry, leaving only an incomplete corpse floating on the sea. This, Xiao Lang and the other two, who were standing on the shore, were stunned as if they had been struck by lightning. They stared blankly at the unbelievable scene in front of them. The Temporal Frog King was killed just like that. Wasn't it too simple? In the beginning, the Temporal Frog King was suppressing the white-clothed young man. Now it was killed in the blink of an eye. Moreover, it was done so cleanly that the three of them couldn't even react. That's a divine ability that contains the laws of spacetime. Could it be that this kid created it by comprehending the laws of spacetime? Xiao Lang was the first to react. He stared at the white-clothed young man with awe and murmured in a low voice. Not only Xiao Lang, but the middle-aged man and the black-clothed man beside him also showed fear and awe. However, there was also a trace of excitement in their awe. The fact that the white-clothed young man in front of them possessed the divine ability of the laws of spacetime meant that this kid was likely to pass the trial smoothly. At that time, the three of them might be rescued. After killing the Temporal Frog King, Yun was panting and his face was quite pale. He could only use the waning sun at the sea once. After using it, he would become very weak. He could only use it again after he slowly recovered. Zhuowen sat cross-legged on the plank road. He was not in a hurry to go to the plank road. Instead, he asked Xiao He and the Blood Celestial Sword to guard him while he focused on recuperating and recovering his divine power. One must always be on guard against others. Although Xiao Lang and the other two didn't look like villains, they had never met Zhuowen before. Therefore, Yuan naturally couldn't just walk over like that. He had to wait until he recovered first. Xiao Lang and the other two naturally couldn't go forward rashly. Zhuowen's behavior had already indicated that they couldn't get close at the moment. Therefore, the three of them stood on the shore and waited silently. 4 hours later, Zhuowen's divine power recovered a little. He immediately stood up and walked toward the shore. "Thank you, brother." When Zhuowen walked to the shore, Xiao Lang and the other two immediately cupped their hands and thanked him. Zhuowen looked surprised and said, "The three of you must have misunderstood. I didn't do anything for you. Why should I thank you?" Xiao Lang quickly explained, "Brother, you don't know. The Temporal Frog King has been guarding outside the island. It doesn't allow cultivators to leave the island. Once they leave the island, they will be killed by the Temporal Frog King." Chapter 23-27. The checkpoint. Zhuowen was startled, then he asked, "You want to go back the way you came?" Xiao Lang nodded and said, "Yes. Back then, we accidentally entered this training ground. This was our first stop, but after entering this island, we no longer had enough strength to continue forward, so we want to go back the way we came and leave this place." Jun narrowed his eyes and said in a deep voice, "I am Jun. I am new here, so I don't know much about this place. Can the three of you tell me more about this place?" When the three heard this, they looked at each other. In the end, Xiao Lang smiled and said, "Of course. I don't think anyone who can enter this place is an ordinary person. Actually, it's like this." Luan listened to Xiao Lang in silence. He had a rough understanding of this place. Xiao Lang and the other two were three brothers. They were also famous loose cultivators in the Six Desires heavenly domain. Xiao Lang was the second brother. His eldest brother was called Xiao Yin, and his third brother was called Xiao Fu. Among the three of them, Xiao Lang had the highest talent and strength. His strength had reached the peak of the 8 steps void sky. When the three Xiao brothers heard that there was a part of the space-time wheel in the river of space-time quicksand, they naturally wanted the space-time wheel. They entered the depths of the river of space-time quicksand and finally arrived at the base of the cliff in the depths of the sea. After they entered the base of the cliff, they also encountered the mysterious head. However, the mysterious head did not talk nonsense with the three of them. It only said that if they wanted to obtain the space-time key, then they should go back to the training ground. The three of them did not even have time to react. Their bodies were eternally frozen at a certain point in time, and their souls were transported to this training ground. They came to this island in the first checkpoint, but when they wanted to pass the next checkpoint, they found that they did not have enough understanding of the space-time law. It was impossible for them to pass the second checkpoint. Therefore, they stayed on this island for thousands of years. It was so long that they almost lost track of time. At first, there were many other cultivators here. A small number of cultivators comprehended the power of the space-time law and successfully passed the second checkpoint and left this place. Most of the other cultivators could not bear the loneliness of this place and wanted to go back the way they came. Unfortunately, it was easy to enter but difficult to leave. Once one intended to leave the island, the Time Frog King would appear and wipe out all the cultivators who intended to leave. In the end, the cultivators on the island either left or died. In the end, only the three brothers were left. Even so, the three brothers were on the verge of collapse. If it wasn't for Zhuowen's appearance, Xiao Lang would have probably gone to the Time Frog King to seek death. After listening to the three brothers, a puzzled look appeared on Zhuowen's face. Based on what the three of them had said, it seemed like they had arrived in this space the moment they entered the trial grounds. They hadn't entered the place where Zhuowen had comprehended the setting sun. However, Zhuowen had entered that strange space and comprehended a space-time divine ability that belonged solely to him. Could this have been arranged by the mysterious head? He also found out from the three of them that it was his soul that had entered this place, not his physical body. Although it was his divine soul that entered this trial space, this space was very strange. He could use the divine weapons in his spiritual ring and his own divine abilities, and it would not affect his strength. "Are you planning to go back the way you came?" Zhuowen asked with a frown. "Yes, Brother Zhuo. Is there a problem?" Xiao Lang said with a smile. "With all due respect, when I entered this space, I couldn't even distinguish the entrance. If you go back the way you came, I'm afraid." Zhuowen didn't finish his sentence, but he knew that Xiao Lang and the other two should know what he meant. Sure enough, Xiao Lang and the other two looked at each other helplessly. Then, Xiao Lang cupped his fists and said, "Thank you, Brother Zhua, for reminding us. It seems that we have to continue waiting." Speaking of this, Xiao Lang looked at Zhuan with a burning gaze. When Zhuan used the sun waning above the sea, he could feel that this white-clothed young man in front of him was very likely to pass this trial. He had seen many cultivators who had entered this trial, but it was the first time he had seen someone who could create their own space-time divine ability. Brother Zhua, the strength of this place is mostly determined by the depth of your understanding of the space-time law. Although you are only at the Void Sky 7th step, you have created your own space-time divine ability. You are much stronger than the three of us. Speaking of this, Xiao Lang said excitedly, "Brother Zhua, maybe you can be the first person to pass this trial." Zhuan's expression was calm. He didn't show any complacency because of Xiao Lang's praise. Instead, he said in a deep voice, "Before we pass, I hope that Brother Xiao can tell me in detail everything you know about this trial space." This time, Yuan mainly came for the space-time key. If he wanted to get the space-time key, he had to pass this trial. Although he had the help of the mysterious head, Zhuan wanted to succeed, so he naturally wanted to know more. After all, know yourself and know your enemy, and you will never be defeated. Actually, it's like this. There are a total of 3 stages in this trial. This is only the first stage. There are 2 more stages after that. Moreover, every stage has a corresponding reward. Moreover, the further you go, the more generous the rewards are, Xiao Lang quickly said. Reward? Zhuan looked at Xiao Lang in confusion. Xiao Lang smiled and said, "Brother Zhua, don't worry. You have passed the first stage, so you will naturally have a corresponding reward. When the time comes, go to the center of the island, and the reward will be there. This is the reward given by the trial space, and it is different for everyone. It is said that the reward will be given based on the performance of the challenger. The better the performance, the more generous the reward. With Brother Zhua's previous performance, I think the reward will definitely be extraordinary." Zhuan nodded in understanding. It seemed that when the time came, he would have to go to the center of the island to have a look. He wondered what kind of reward this trial space would give him. When the challenger passes the 3 stages, it is said that they will obtain the space-time key. The space-time key is a good thing. I only learned about it after I was teleported here. It turns out that such a good thing as the space-time key was hidden in the river of space-time quicksand. Speaking of this, Xiao Lang's eyes were full of excitement. It was obvious that he had a strong desire for the space-time key. Hearing this, Duan sighed softly. It seemed that in the 6 Desires heavenly realm, there was basically no one who knew that the space-time key was in the river of space-time quicksand. Thinking about it, if the news of the space-time key were to spread, it would attract the interest of many old monsters. Even the cultivators of the Void Sky 9 steps would come out. The river of space-time quicksand would not be so deserted, and a mere quicksand family would not be able to protect such a precious place like the river of space-time quicksand. Where is the entrance to the second stage? Zhuan suddenly asked. Xiao Lang was startled and immediately said, "It is also in the center of the island. However, the second stage is more humane. Even if the challenger is not strong enough, as long as they do not die in the stage, they can return to the first island. The 3 of us have already tried several times, but we have all failed." When they spoke up to hear, the 3 brothers sighed dejectedly. Zhuan nodded and said, "Take me to the center of the island." Chapter 23-28. Rewards. In the center of the island, Yuan stood in front of a stone pillar. This stone pillar was blood-red in color, and its surface was engraved with many patterns. It was at least 1,000 feet tall. "Brother Zhua, this stone pillar is the key to the second checkpoint. However, Brother Zhua, you just fought with the Time Light Frog King, so it's best that you don't try the second stage yet. You can choose your reward first," Xiao Lang said. Zhuan nodded. He had consumed a lot of energy in the battle with the Time Frog King, and he had only recovered a little. Naturally, he couldn't rashly challenge the second stage. Zhuan followed Xiao Lang's instructions and stared at the blood-red imprint on the surface of the stone pillar. Soon after, Two blood-red rays of light shot out from the blood-red imprint and were reflected in Zhuowen's eyes. Not long after, a secret chamber appeared at the bottom of the stone pillar. Zhuowen squinted his eyes and looked at the secret chamber. However, there was a force on the surface of the secret chamber and Zhuowen's spiritual consciousness could not penetrate it. Instantly, black shadows flew out of the secret pavilion and floated in front of Zhuowen. Zhuowen looked at the things in front of him with a strange expression. These black shadows were actually broken parts. Upon closer inspection, they were probably parts of a spacecraft. Furthermore, Zhuowen also sensed an extremely rich space-time law aura from these parts. Furthermore, this aura was much richer than the space-time sea. It's a part of the space-time roulette. He actually gave out dozens of parts at once. It seems that Brother Zhuo's performance is really good this time. When Xiao Lang and the other two saw the piles of components floating in front of Zhuowen, their eyes revealed shock and envy. One had to know that when they had just passed the first level, they had also received their rewards here. However, the three of them had only received fragmented parts, and they were very small in size. They could not be compared to any of the parts in front of Zhuowen. On the other hand, Zhuowen had obtained dozens of components in one go. How could the three of them not be moved? Space-time roulette? Zhuowen murmured. He had heard of this item from Yao Xiangjuan before. It was said to be the fastest flying divine artifact. However, it was later shattered by several mighty figures. Who would have thought that this fragment would actually fall here and be used as a reward? Brother Zhuo, the components of the space-time roulette are good stuff. Naturally, they contain the laws of space-time. If you can refine these components into a flying ship, its speed will definitely be unparalleled. Of course, if you can make it into a space-time hollow, its speed will definitely be even faster. At the very least, most flying-type divine artifacts will not be able to compete with it, Xiao Lang said with a smile. Zhuowen nodded and said in a deep voice, "Could it be that the rewards for the next stages are all related to the space-time roulette?" Xiao Lang nodded and said, "Indeed. The most important one is the space-time core. It is said that the space-time core is in the third trial. Only if you perform well enough will you be able to obtain the space-time core. Moreover, there are only two space-time cores. As for whether they have been obtained by others, I do not know." Xiao Yin interrupted and said, "Regardless of whether you can obtain it or not, if you can't get out, wouldn't it be useless to obtain the space-time core? Big Brother is right. No matter how precious the treasures are, what's the point of being trapped here? Are you going to wait for death while guarding a pile of treasures?" The black-clothed man agreed. Xiao Lang smiled and looked at Zhuowen with a burning gaze. He said, "Brother Zhuo, little Brother Zhuo, you were able to comprehend the laws of space-time and kill the space-time frog king. From this, it can be seen that you are not ordinary. Perhaps you can successfully pass through the third trial. You should know that the space-time frog king's strength is about the same as the second trial's guardian." Zhuowen understood what Xiao Lang meant. The space-time frog king would not normally appear. Once it did, it would definitely be a disaster for the cultivators on the island. Its strength was also about the same as the second trial's guardian. Since he was able to kill the space-time frog king, he would naturally be able to deal with the second trial's guardian. Xiao Yin and Xiao Fu's eyes also revealed a fervent look. They had been waiting for a powerful monster to appear and completely break through this trial ground. That way, they would have hope of being rescued. As for the white-clothed young man before them, it was clear that they had high hopes for him. "Do the three of you want to follow me to the second trial?" Zhuowen asked Xiao Lang's team of three. The second trial was more humane. As long as they were not killed, they would be able to retreat and their lives would not be in danger. Additionally, Xiao Lang's team of three were not bad people. Zhuowen had a good impression of them. Thus, he was willing to bring them to the second trial. Of course, Zhuowen had another purpose, and that was that the number of cultivators at the second checkpoint shouldn't be too small, and there should be people that Xiao Lang and the others were familiar with. When the time came for him to enter, he would be able to save some breath. "Brother Zhuo, you are willing to bring us along?" Xiao Lang's eyes were filled with excitement. However, they quickly dimmed and he said solemnly, "Brother Zhuo, I fear that is not appropriate. The difficulty of this trial increases according to the number of people. The more people there are, the more difficult it will be. Back then, there were quite a number of cultivators on the island. We had joined forces to break through, but we suffered heavy casualties. Hearing this, Zhuowen frowned slightly. It seemed that the person who set up the trial had already thought of this situation. It doesn't matter. We can give it a try first. If it doesn't work, we can retreat at that time, Zhuowen said. Xiao Lang's team of 3 looked at each other and saw the excitement in each other's eyes. Although they were quite worried that the difficulty of the trial would increase, they believed in Zhuowen's strength more. Brother Zhuo, regardless of whether you can bring us through the second trial this time, the 3 of us brothers are very grateful to you. Xiao Lang cupped his fists toward Zhuowen. Then, he took out a jade talisman from his bosom and handed it to Zhuowen. This is? Zhuowen took the jade talisman and asked in surprise. This jade talisman belongs to a friend of mine. He is a skilled weapon refiner. I saw that Brother Zhuo obtained a lot of parts of the space-time roulette. It is completely possible to refine a small roulette. If Brother Zhuo can pass the second trial, then you can look for my friend. Of course, if this Xiao is lucky enough to pass the trial under the guidance of Brother Zhuo, this Xiao will personally bring Brother Zhuo to my friend. Xiao Lang laughed. Zhuowen was surprised. He did not expect Xiao Lang to have a weapon refiner friend. He could not help but ask, then, who is better at weapon refining, your friend or Kuang Li of the Quicksand family? Xiao Lang sneered. Brother Zhuo, Kuang Li's weapon refining level can only be said to be above average. That Kuang Li can only act like a tyrant in the Gulan galaxy. In the entire 6 Desires heavenly realm, his weapon refining level is nothing. But my friend is different. Even in the 6 Desires heavenly domain, his armor-making skills are top-notch. Back then, the 6 Desires Palace even wanted to invite my friend to be their royal armor-making grandmaster, with the same treatment as the law enforcement elder of the 6 Desires Palace, but my friend refused. Zhuowen was shocked. If Xiao Lang's words were true, then this friend of his was really amazing. Generally, the law-enforcing elder of a sect was a person of high status and authority. The law-enforcing elder of a behemoth like the 6 Desires Palace had the power to cover the sky with one hand. Chapter 23-29. Sam, thank you, Brother Xiao. Zhuowen cupped his hands in gratitude. Xiao Lang waved his hands repeatedly, saying that he didn't dare. Next, Zhuowen recuperated on the island. He hadn't fully recovered yet, so he planned to challenge the second checkpoint after he recovered. Moreover, Zhuowen also discovered that the space-time rules on this island were easier to accept and comprehend. During the time he stayed on the island, he actually naturally understood many of the space-time rules that had previously troubled him. Half a month later, Zhuowen had completely recovered. When Zhuowen walked out of the cave, he discovered that Xiao Lang and his 2 brothers were already waiting by the stone pillar. Brother Zhuo, as long as you place your hand on the stone pillar, will be teleported to the second checkpoint. Be careful at that time, Xiao Lang said solemnly. Zhuowen nodded and walked in front of the stone pillar. He stretched out his right hand and placed it on the surface of the stone pillar. Xiao Lang and his 2 brothers followed closely behind him. A blood-red light burst out from the stone pillar and enveloped the 3 people beside it. What appeared in front of Zhuowen was still a sea, but this sea was blood-red. However, it still contained a rich aura of the space-time rules. Above the blood-red sea, there was a long white jade bridge. If one looked carefully, the end of the white jade bridge led to another island. This island was obviously different from the first one because this island was covered in white snow. At a glance, it was a beautiful scene of ice and snow. Zhuowen, Xiao Lang, and the other 3 stood at the other end of the white jade bridge. Brother Zhuo, you have to pay attention to the seawater. The blood-red color on the surface of the seawater is a terrifying creature. We've been here before, so we know how terrifying this blood-red color is. Xiao Lang pointed at the blood-red color under the bridge and said in a frightened voice. Zhuowen nodded. With a wave of his sleeve, he threw out 81 beast bone array discs and set up a powerful defensive array in an instant. Be careful and follow me closely. After Zhuowen finished speaking, he took a step forward and flew towards the white jade bridge. The 81 beast bone array discs were constantly revolving around Zhuowen. Waves of array fluctuations spread out, indicating that the beast bone array discs around him were unusual. Xiao Lang and the other two followed closely behind Zhuan. All of them took out their respective divine artifacts and were secretly on guard against the blood-red color under the bridge. Along the way, it was exceptionally quiet under the white jade bridge. The surface of the sea was even more tranquil. However, the more it was like this, the more vigilant Zhuan and the others became, and their footsteps became even faster. Rumble! The moment the four of them walked to the center of the white jade bridge, the surface of the sea under the bridge suddenly exploded. Then, waves of blood rushed out from the surface of the sea and gathered in the air, finally forming a strange human figure that was dozens of feet tall. This strange human figure was made up of blood. Its appearance was like mud, and from time to time, a red sticky substance would drip from its body. It looked exceptionally disgusting. The strange humanoid figure did not have clear facial features. The two bloody holes in its head were like two intelligent eyes. This is the Guardian? Zhuan frowned slightly. He took a few steps back and turned to look at Xiao Lang and the other two. Xiao Lang and the other two's faces were deathly pale. Their eyes were filled with deep fear, and their lips trembled. Zhuan realized that something was wrong and hurriedly asked, "What's wrong with you?" Xiao Lang calmed down. He took a deep breath and said with a trembling voice, "Brother Zhua, we're in big trouble. The guardian of the second checkpoint is called Sam. This thing is a soft-bodied creature. Usually, it basically lives on the surface of the space-time sea. It floats on the surface of the sea and stains the sea water red. When the challengers come, Sam will condense a corporeal body to obstruct them. Sam has thousands of forms. They can generally be divided into 3 types: plant, animal, and human. Among them, the plant form is the weakest, while the human form is the strongest and most terrifying. Back when we were challenging this checkpoint, Sam only showed his plant form." After Xiao Lang said that, Xiao Yin continued, "Even if Sam was in his plant form, we were no match for him. Back then, when we formed a group of over 10 people to challenge this checkpoint, Sam only showed his animal form. His strength was extremely terrifying. 10 of us were killed, and only a few of us managed to escape. As for his human form, this is the first time I've seen it." Hearing that, Zhuan nodded. He finally understood why Xiao Lang and the other two were so afraid of Sam. It turned out that Sam was so terrifying. Furthermore, he had shown an unprecedented human form. Sam's empty eyes did not look at Xiao Lang and the other two. Instead, they fell on Zhuan. He said in a low voice, "Did you kill the temporal frog king?" Zhuan was startled. Soon after, he said indifferently, "Yes." "So what?" "Ha, to be able to kill the temporal frog king, you're pretty good. However, I'll kill you." Although the temporal frog king and I weren't on good terms, we were still fellow sufferers trapped in the same place. Since you killed him, I have to avenge him. Otherwise, he would have died too unjustly. Sam's voice was hollow and hoarse. It sounded exceptionally ear-piercing. "I don't think the temporal frog king needs you to avenge him, because you'll be able to meet him very soon." Zhuan pulled out the emperor's sword and said in an indifferent voice. Sam grinned. "You're quite stubborn. I wonder how long you can be so stubborn." After saying that, Sam took a step with his right foot. Like a bolt of lightning, he disappeared from where he stood. By the time Sam reappeared, he was already within reach. Rumble! Sam clenched his right hand into a fist and slammed it in front of Zhuan. Immediately, the 81 beast bone array discs around him burst out with violent ripples, resisting Sam's terrifying fist energy. Zhuan's eyes narrowed as he looked at the beast bone array discs that were constantly trembling. Sam's strength was indeed extraordinary. With just a single punch, he was able to cause the defensive array set up by the beast bone array discs to tremble so much. Boom! Boom! Sam roared furiously, throwing out punch after punch like a madman. His punches were so fast that it was shocking. Every punch created a series of fist shadows. The fist shadows also contained extremely terrifying space-time rules. When he threw out a punch, space and time seemed to freeze. Xiao Lang and the other two were aghast. They trembled in fear and their legs went soft. They didn't dare to make a move. The three of you stay in the array. I'll go meet this Sam. Zhuan glanced at the frightened Xiao Lang behind him. He knew that the three of them wouldn't be of any use, so he took a step forward and jumped out of the defensive array. Die! Sam's eyes were sharp and his hands were nimble. He suddenly punched out at an extremely fast speed, directly toward Zhuo Wen's chest. Chapter 23:30. Human Form Rumble. The fist force collided with the sword force, causing a ring-shaped shockwave to erupt. Instantly, pillars of water shot out from the surface of the sea like raging dragons. The power of the laws of space-time spread out like a raging storm. On the other end of the white jade bridge, the faces of Xiao Lang and the other two, who were protected by the beast bone array disc, changed slightly as bitter smiles appeared at the corners of their mouths. The collision between Zhuowen and Sam was truly terrifying. Even though they were so far away, the shockwaves from the laws of space-time that spread out caused them to tremble in fear. Brother Zhuo has become stronger. His utilization of the laws of space-time is also much stronger than before. Xiao Lang could not help but sigh as a look of admiration appeared in his eyes. The trial grounds are meant to improve your comprehension of the laws of space-time. Back then, before we entered this trial grounds, we only had a smattering of knowledge of the laws of space-time. However, after entering the island of the first stage, our understanding of the laws of space-time improved considerably by relying on the laws of space-time within the island. As for Brother Zhuo, before entering the island, his grasp of the laws of space-time was already far above the three of us. After staying on the island for a while, it is only natural that he has a deeper understanding and utilization of the laws of space-time. A look of awe appeared in Xiao Yin's eyes. They knew that aside from the rewards, the most important thing about the island was that the laws of space-time within the island were gentler compared to the laws of the outside world, making it easier to comprehend. Generally speaking, cultivators who could enter the island would be able to gain a certain amount of benefits. The amount of benefits would depend on the cultivator's perception and talent. Xiao Lang and the other two knew that even if they stayed on the island for a long time, they would not be able to pass the second stage. However, Yun was different. Before entering the island, he had killed the temporal frog king. Now that he had been baptized by the gentle laws of space-time within the island, it was only natural that his grasp of the laws of space-time would be even stronger. Boom, boom, boom. The more Zhuowen and Sam fought, the more ferocious they became. Terrifying shockwaves spread out, causing the white jade bridge on the other end to shake violently. It was as though it would collapse at any moment. At the other end of the bridge, there were two cultivators sitting cross-legged. The two cultivators who were meditating suddenly opened their eyes as if they had sensed something. A tall and thin cultivator looked at the chubby cultivator opposite him and said, "Did you hear anything?" The slightly plump cultivator's gaze turned solemn as he noticed the white jade bridge in front of him. He said in a deep voice, "The bridge is shaking. Furthermore, I can sense an extremely powerful fluctuation of the space-time law in the distance. Someone is trying to break through there." The tall and skinny cultivator nodded. His eyes flickered as he said, "We have been guarding the bridge for hundreds of years under Ancestor Lu's orders. This is the first time we have seen the bridge shake so violently. Should we go over and take a look?" The fat cultivator frowned slightly and said with some hesitation, "Ancestor Lu has given orders before that we must not leave our posts without permission. Otherwise, we will have to bear the consequences. Do you intend to go against Ancestor Lu's orders?" The thin and tall cultivator said disapprovingly, "Ancestor Lu is in seclusion most of the time. How can he pay attention to small characters like us? We are just going to take a look, not to cause trouble." The slightly plump cultivator was tempted. In fact, he also wanted to go over and take a look. However, he recalled Ancestor Lu's orders and had some misgivings. Now that the tall and skinny cultivator had said this, his misgivings were greatly reduced. The slightly plump cultivator said with some concern, "All right, but we'd better go over quietly. If there is anything wrong, we'll immediately retreat. That Sam of the second trial is not to be trifled with." The tall and skinny cultivator chuckled and said, "Don't worry. Can't you see that the bridge is shaking so violently? That Sam must be fighting the challengers right now. I wonder what form Sam will use to fight." The lanky cultivator chuckled. The slightly plump cultivator said with interest, "I have only seen Sam's plant form and animal form. It is said that Sam has a final form, human form, but I have never seen it." The tall and skinny cultivator said with some trepidation, "That Sam is indeed terrifying. We were lucky and only encountered that guy's plant form, but even in that form, he almost killed us." The slightly plump cultivator said with some reverence, "You're right. Sam's animal form is very terrifying. However, I heard that when Ancestor Lu broke through the second trial, Sam's human form was also drawn out. Furthermore, Ancestor Lu smoothly passed through Sam's obstruction and successfully reached the second island." The tall and skinny cultivator shrugged and said, "Don't you know what kind of person Ancestor Lu is? He should be the most promising existence to enter the third island. I don't find it strange that he passed through Sam's obstruction in human form." The slightly plump cultivator nodded and agreed with the tall and skinny cultivator's words. On the second island, Ancestor Lu was the leader and the most powerful person on the island. There were almost no cultivators on the second island who dared to disobey Ancestor Lu. "We're almost there. The battle is over there." The tall and skinny cultivator suddenly stopped and stared ahead with vigilance. On the long bridge thousands of meters ahead, two figures were constantly fighting. The aftermath of the battle spread out and caused endless waves to rise on the sea below the bridge. It was an extremely terrifying scene. The tall and skinny cultivator's eyes narrowed and immediately noticed a blood-colored figure among the two fighting figures. He frowned and said, "That figure can't be Sam, right? This form, I have never seen it before." The slightly plump cultivator trembled and said, "Of course you haven't seen it before, because this is his human form. Oh my God, someone actually encountered Sam's human form and even fought him to a standstill. Is this guy a freak?" The tall and skinny cultivator was taken aback and shock appeared in his eyes. He also saw Sam's human form and then his gaze fell on the white-clothed youth who was fighting Sam. "Who is this person? He's so strong. With this kid's strength, he doesn't need to be entangled with Sam at all and can immediately pass through the bridge." The tall and skinny cultivator said in surprise. The slightly plump cultivator's gaze fell on Xiao Lang and the other two who were quite far behind the white-clothed youth and said in a deep voice, "This person brought 3 people here. If he wants to take them away, he must defeat or kill Sam. Otherwise, he won't be able to pass through the bridge at all." The tall and skinny cultivator reacted and also noticed Xiao Lang and the other two on the other side. He was speechless and said, "This person is too kind. With this strength, he can just pass by himself, but he still wants to take care of others. Isn't he asking for trouble? Although this kid is not weak, I don't think he can last long. Sam's human form is very terrifying and he hasn't used his ultimate move yet." Chapter 23:31. Difficult to deal with. Shuowen's gaze became more and more solemn. Sam was really strong, even stronger than the Time Frog King. Ever since Juan cultivated on the second island for a while, he naturally went through the baptism of the space-time law on the first island, which made his mastery of the space-time law even stronger. But now, he found it more difficult to deal with Sam than he did with the Time Frog King. This was something he didn't expect. The power of the waning sun over the sea was really terrifying. If Juan used it now, he could seriously injure or even kill Sam. However, Juan didn't feel particularly at ease with Xiao Lang and the other two. Moreover, during the battle just now, he also noticed the tall and thin cultivator and the slightly fat cultivator coming from the other side of the bridge. He knew that these two people were cultivators from the second island. Without knowing whether they were friends or foes, he really did not want to expose the sun of waning life on the sea. After all, he would become extremely weak after using this sun of waning life on the sea. Boom! Just as Juan was pondering, Sam roared and suddenly punched out. The fist wind rushed over, followed by a thick, blood-red mucus that blasted in front of Juan. Juan flipped his left hand and summoned the phagocytosis, which blocked the mucus that splashed over. At the same time, The fist wind blasted over and smashed into the phagocytosis. Bang! Zhuan groaned and was forced back by this huge force. His gaze became extremely gloomy. This Sam was really incredible. The more he fought, the stronger he became. Seeing Zhuan being forced back, Sam roared and punched out again. This punch was powerful and heavy, carrying a terrifying power that could penetrate the heavens. Even Zhuan's expression changed. Zhuan spat out a mouthful of blood essence onto the phagocytosis and immediately activated the power of the Tao rhythm within the phagocytosis. At the same time, Zhuan summoned the everlasting ice lotus and a terrifying cold energy bloomed like a lotus flower. The phagocytosis contained the heavenly Tao of the Tao fruit, and the ice lotus contained the ice essence. These two treasures were extremely rare in the outside world, so it was easy to imagine how terrifying their combined might would be. Rumble! As the fist energy blasted out, the surrounding air surged, filling the air with terrifying ripples. However, the combination of the phagocytosis and the everlasting ice lotus barely blocked this attack. Moreover, the extreme ice in the everlasting ice lotus froze all of Sam's attacks in place. At this moment, the torch dragon wings on Zhuowen's back suddenly unfolded. He took a step forward with his right foot and disappeared on the spot. The moment Zhuan reappeared, a dense sword light appeared and swept out. He had been waiting for Sam to make a mistake, and this was definitely his most powerful strike. Sam's expression changed slightly. He had been too careless. He didn't expect that Zhuan would have such a precious treasure like the everlasting ice lotus. Although this freezing cold chi had only frozen his right fist for about a breath of time. Although the ice only froze his attack for a moment, it was enough for an expert like Zhuan to send out hundreds and thousands of sword attacks. Puchi! When Sam's right fist finally broke free from the frozen state, the endless sword light rained down on Sam's body. Then, Sam's entire body was cut into 8 pieces, into countless small pieces. At the same time, Zhuan waved his right hand, and the everlasting ice lotus floated above Sam. A terrifying cold energy swept out like a wave, freezing all the pieces of flesh. The moment the flesh was frozen, phagocytosis fell from the sky and smashed all the ice into powder. Zhuan was still not satisfied. He bent the king's sword in his hand and swung it. Suddenly, with Zhuan as the center, a terrifying spatial crack appeared. The shattered ice fell into the spatial crack and was completely annihilated. Zhuan looked at the powder that disappeared into the spatial crack, and his gaze relaxed slightly. Before coming to this checkpoint, Xiao Lang had already told him about Sam's characteristics. He knew that Sam's vitality was very strong. If he couldn't get rid of him by the roots, Sam would basically be immortal. This was also the main reason why Zhuan had used such a combo after seizing the opportunity. This guy is so strong. I'm afraid he's as strong as Ancestor Lu, right? The thin and tall cultivator said in shock. The fat cultivator frowned slightly and said in a deep voice, "That's not necessarily true. Ancestor Lu passed through here many years ago. Do you think Ancestor Lu hasn't taken a single step forward all these years? In my opinion, this kid is very strong, but there's still a gap between him and Ancestor Lu." The thin and tall cultivator nodded and didn't refute the fat cultivator's words. He knew that the fat cultivator had seen Ancestor Lu's battle and knew better than him how terrifying Ancestor Lu was. Since he said that Ancestor Lu was stronger than this kid, it should be true. However, what shocked the thin and tall cultivator was that the white-clothed youth in front of him was a newcomer who had just entered the second checkpoint, but he had already killed Sam. This strength definitely couldn't be underestimated, and his talent was definitely above Ancestor Lu's. As long as this kid was given time, it wouldn't be too big of a problem for him to surpass Ancestor Lu. Xiao Lang and the other two were ecstatic. They rushed to Zhuowen's side and asked about his well-being excitedly. Puchi! Suddenly, the thin and tall cultivator standing not far away spat out a mouthful of blood and then fell to the ground, spitting out blood from his mouth. "Judy, what's wrong with you?" The fat cultivator was startled and quickly pulled up the thin and tall cultivator and asked. Unfortunately, the thin and tall cultivator's eyes turned white and he lost consciousness. He just kept spitting out blood. The fat cultivator quickly let go of the thin and tall cultivator and couldn't help but retreat again and again, looking at the strange condition of the thin and tall cultivator with fear in his eyes. Could it be? The fat cultivator seemed to have thought of something, and cold sweat kept flowing down his forehead. Then he didn't dare to stay here any longer and left the place in a flash. What's wrong with that guy? Xiao Lang also noticed the strange condition of the thin and tall cultivator not far away and couldn't help but ask in surprise. You guys retreat first. Zhuan looked at the thin and tall cultivator not far away, but his eyes were filled with bewilderment because he felt an extremely familiar and terrifying aura from the thin and tall cultivator. This aura was too similar to Sam's that he had just killed. Boom! After Xiao Lang and the other two retreated a few hundred meters, the thin and tall cultivator exploded. A bloody mist sprayed out and dyed the white jade bridge blood red. Then, the bloody mist began to condense and squirm, and in an instant, it formed a strange blood-colored human figure. And this blood-colored human figure was no stranger to Zhuan. It was Sam. I was too careless. I didn't expect you to be hiding a trump card. But now, I won't be careless again. Today, you will die for me. Sam's resentful voice sounded, and then he rushed toward Zhuan without caring about his own safety. Zhuan's eyes were solemn. With a twist of his right wrist, the sword light turned into a huge dragon and rushed out, instantly enveloping Sam. Do you think I will be as careless as before? You are too naive. Chapter 23:32. Pesping. Sam, who had turned into a puddle of blood, was extremely fast. In an instant he slammed into Zhuan's chest. Fortunately, Zhuan reacted quickly and used the phagocytosis to block in front of him. Even so, when the puddle of blood slammed into the phagocytosis, a huge force was transmitted through the phagocytosis to Zhuan's body, causing Zhuan to let out a muffled groan and his face to turn slightly pale. Zhuan once again used the Big Bang technique. A powerful spatial tearing force pervaded his body. Unfortunately, Sam was extremely cautious this time. Although the power of Heaven and Earth Splitter was powerful, Sam had fled in advance, causing Zhuowen's attack to miss. Bang, bang, bang. The two once again engaged in a fierce battle. This time, Yuan was completely at a disadvantage. Even though he had the infinite ice lotus and the phagocytosis at the same time, he was still fiercely suppressed by Sam. Sam let out a light breath. He knew that the white-clothed youth in front of him should not have any more trump cards. Based on the current situation, Sam knew that it would not be long before this kid would be defeated by him. Rumble. A muffled sound like thunder rang out. Sam's fist was extremely crafty. Like a viper hunting for its prey, it swiftly swept out and ruthlessly struck Zhuowen's chest. This punch was too terrifying. The phagocytosis and the infinite ice lotus in front of Zhuan were all blasted away. Under this heavy blow, Zhuan fell onto the white jade bridge like a withered leaf, smashing a deep hole in the bridge's surface. Brother Zhua, Xiao Lang and the other two watched with fear and worry in their hearts. Kid, with your strength, it would not be difficult for you to pass my trial. Unfortunately, you are too arrogant. Not only did you want to bring those 3 pieces of trash over, you even tried to kill me. You really overestimated yourself. Sam crossed his arms and hovered in midair, looking down at the young man in white who was deeply embedded in the bridge. Sam was well aware of how terrifying his punch was. In his opinion, the white-clothed young man who had taken his punch head-on would be severely injured even if he didn't die. Now do you know how insignificant and useless you are? The corners of Sam's mouth curled into a smile, but his smile quickly froze because he discovered that there was a figure wriggling in the pit. The white-clothed youth who had been severely injured by him was actually slowly struggling to stand up. You're actually not dead yet. You're quite lucky. However, let's see if you can take my next punch, Sam snorted coldly. He bent his right knee and stomped on the ground. His entire body plummeted down like a meteor, and the direction his right knee fell just happened to be the head of the white-clothed youth in the deep pit. However, when Sam was about to approach the white-clothed youth, he discovered that there was an extremely terrifying restriction around him. This restriction was extremely terrifying. It was as if countless chains had sealed his limbs and bones. Sam wanted to move, but he found that he couldn't move at all. What's going on? Sam's eyes revealed a touch of fear. Juan stood up shakily and smiled faintly. I didn't want to use this move at first, but unfortunately, you forced me to this point. Even if this move consumes a lot of energy, I'll still kill you. After saying that, Juan raised his right hand and pointed at the void. Suddenly, the spatial restriction became more and more terrifying. Sam, who was the closest, felt it the most clearly. He clearly felt that this restriction wasn't just a spatial restriction, but also a freezing of time. Then, Sam saw a waning sun slowly rising behind Juan. The moment this waning sun rose, the calm sea suddenly surged with waves tens of thousands of feet high, as if worshipping this waning sun that had just risen. Space-time law ability? How is that possible? It's impossible to comprehend a space-time law ability just by passing the first stage. When Sam saw the rising waning sun, the fear in his eyes couldn't be erased for a long time. Sam finally knew why the Time Frog King died in the hands of this kid. It was because this kid had comprehended his own space-time law ability. In this trial space, space-time law ability was the fatal weakness of challengers. This kind of ability had an absolute suppression on them. Bang bang bang. As the waning sun rose, clouds of blood mist burst out from Sam's body. Countless blood-red mucus splashed out, looking extremely disgusting. I'm not willing. When the waning sun rose to its highest point, Sam roared at the sky. Then he was completely annihilated under the light of the waning sun. After killing Sam, Juan's forehead was covered in cold sweat. His face was even paler. Even his body was shaking as if he would fall at any time. At this moment, Juan was even weaker than when he fought the Time Frog King. After all, he was seriously injured by Sam before he used the waning sun over the sea. Now, after using the waning sun over the sea, Juan's injuries would only worsen. Taking a deep breath, Juan took out the heavenly domain starry sky essence from his spirit ring and slowly swallowed it. The injuries on his body instantly healed, but the fatigue in his spirit did not disappear. Although Juan knew that he would not enter the trial space with his body, but with his spirit, this space was extremely magical. Although he only entered with his spirit, he could use and bring in the spirit ring and the things inside. Even the heavenly domain starry sky essence and other healing divine medicines were all effective. Anything that could be used in the outside world, his spirit could also use in this space. Brother Zhua, are you okay? Xiao Lang and the other two hurriedly came to Juan's side, their faces filled with excitement. Sam's death meant that the three of them could enter the second island. I'm fine, I just consumed a lot of energy. Let me recover first. Juan waved his hand, then immediately took out a futon, sat down cross-legged, and began to recuperate. In fact, after taking the heavenly domain starry sky essence, Juan's injuries were basically healed. The reason why he said so was to observe Xiao Lang and the other two. If the three of them coveted the treasures on Juan's body and launched a sneak attack while he was heavily injured, Juan wouldn't mind eliminating the three of them. Whether it was the phagocytosis or the everlasting ice lotus, they were all supreme treasures in the outside world. These three were not blind. Naturally, they could see the preciousness of Juan's phagocytosis and the everlasting ice lotus. However, Xiao Lang and the other two didn't have any ulterior motives. Instead, they stood around Juan and took the initiative to protect Juan. Juan secretly nodded in his heart. Half an hour later, he stood up and said lightly, "Let's go to the second island." The chubby cultivator stumbled back. When he reached the end of the bridge, he sat down on the ground and said with lingering fear, Sam's human form was too terrifying. Judy was directly born by Sam's body. Fortunately, I ran fast enough. Maybe I would have been left there too. Thinking of the last miserable state of the thin and tall cultivator, the chubby cultivator only shuddered. Chapter 23:33. Valley. The fat cultivator frowned slightly. He and the thin and tall cultivator were both guards of the bridge. If either of them had an accident, it would attract Ancestor Lu's attention. If he hid it and didn't report it, he would be severely punished. However, the two of them had violated the rules and entered the bridge. If the plump cultivator had told the truth, he would have been severely punished as well. After thinking about it, the fat cultivator thought of an idea. He looked deeply at the bridge and muttered, "Anyway, you guys are dead. It's not too much to let you guys be the scapegoat." After saying that, the slightly fat cultivator quickly left the bridgehead. Not long after the fat cultivator left, Yuan brought Xiao Lang and the other two to the bridge. Yuan looked at the two cave mansions on the side of the bridge. His eyes revealed a contemplative look. He couldn't help but think of the thin and tall cultivator and the fat cultivator from before. It seemed that these cave mansions belonged to these two guys. As for the identity of these two guys, one could completely guess. They must be guarding the bridge to prevent other dangerous creatures from the Sea of Time from invading. Zhuo Wen's guess was not wrong, but there was one thing he did not guess. The two cultivators guarding the bridge were indeed there to prevent the invasion of other dangerous creatures in the Sea of Time and Space, but at the same time, they also had another duty, and that was to register the new challengers. However, of the two guards, one was killed by Sam and the other went to report to Ancestor Lu, so they naturally missed Zhuowen, the newcomer. "Brother Xiao, do you know where your friend is?" Zhuowen turned to look at Xiao Lang and asked. Xiao Lang smiled and said, "Brother Zhuo, where is the jade talisman I gave you before?" Zhuowen took out the jade talisman from the spirit ring and handed it to Xiao Lang. "It's here. This thing doesn't seem to be a communication jade talisman, right?" Xiao Lang smiled and said, "This is indeed not a communication jade talisman, but a positioning jade talisman. This jade talisman contains my friend's aura. As long as the distance between the jade talisman and my friend is not more than 1,000 li, this jade talisman can accurately locate my friend's aura. Back then, when my friend left the first island, he left behind this jade talisman for me so that I can look for him when I enter the second island." As he spoke, Xiao Lang's right hand formed a sword and pointed at the jade talisman in his hand. With a swoosh sound, the surface of the jade talisman emitted a gentle glow. After which, the jade talisman floated in the air, chose a certain direction and slowly flew off. "Looks like my friend is still on the island. Let's follow him." Xiao Lang's gaze shook. He immediately followed the jade talisman. Zhuowen and the rest naturally followed closely behind. This was a cliff path with rows upon rows of rock walls on both sides. Moreover, this island was covered in ice and snow all year round. As Zhuowen and the other three walked, the sky was still constantly snowing, and the path beneath their feet was covered in thick snow. The path was winding and complicated. The four of them walked for about a quarter of an hour before finally walking out of the path. What appeared in front of them was an extremely large valley. This valley was filled with birds, flowers, and trees. In the middle of the valley, a silver waterfall flowed down, looking spectacular. The scene in the valley was a sharp contrast to the scene of the island outside. In this valley that was like spring all year round, there were caves of different shapes and sizes. Zhuowen stood at the entrance with the corners of his mouth slightly raised. How could he not see that the reason why this valley was different was because there was some kind of restriction set up in this valley? The jade talisman stopped at the entrance of the valley. To be more precise, it was blocked outside the restriction. "Brother Zhuo, there's a restriction here. What should we do?" Xiao Lang looked at Zhuowen and asked. "Don't worry, I'll take care of this restriction." As Zhuowen spoke, he waved his sleeve and summoned the beast bone array disc. At the same time, his right hand formed seals again and again, looking quite unfathomable. The restriction in the valley wasn't very strong. It was only a level 5 grade array. Moreover, it didn't have any defensive effect. There wasn't even a monitoring array inside. It was obvious that the purpose of the person who set up the array was only to improve the environment in the valley. Not long after, Nguyen opened a small gap on the edge of the restriction, just enough for one person to pass through. "Now it's done, let's go in." Zhuowen smiled and took the lead to follow the jade talisman into the restriction. Although the valley was large, there weren't many cave dwellings inside. There were only about 50 to 60 of them, which meant that there were at least 50 to 60 cultivators in this valley. Although the number wasn't many, Compared to the first island where Xiao Lang and the others were, this place was much more lively. Moreover, these cave dwellings were basically closed. It was obvious that most of the cultivators inside were in a state of seclusion. The jade talisman instantly flew out and flew towards the cave dwellings in the center. Finally, it stopped in front of a cave dwelling that was shaped like a bamboo house. The instant the jade talisman stopped in front of the bamboo house, the restriction on the surface of the bamboo house was opened. A gray-clothed woman walked out from inside. This gray-clothed woman's figure was slightly bloated, and there were some freckles on her face. Although she wasn't ugly, she wasn't good-looking either. She could only be considered a very ordinary woman. The gray-clothed woman clearly intended to go out. However, when her gaze fell on the jade talisman in front of the door, she was immediately stunned. Immediately after, the gray-clothed woman turned her head and finally noticed Jun and the other three. Of course, the gray-clothed woman's gaze was mostly on Xiao Lang and the other two. As for Jun, it was her first time seeing him. Xiao Lang, Xiao Yin, and Xiao Fu, you're finally here. The gray-clothed woman's eyes revealed a look of joy. She hurriedly stepped forward and sized up Xiao Lang and the other two. Moreover, she chatted with the three of them. After the four of them chatted for a while, Xiao Lang pointed at Juan beside him and said, "Junior sister Ruqing, this is Jun." This time, the three of us were able to enter the second island thanks to brother Jun. The gray-clothed woman looked at Juan in surprise. Soon after, she chuckled and revealed an indifferent expression. She casually said to Jun, "Thank you for your help, brother. Otherwise, I don't know when I would be able to see the three of them again." Juan nodded and didn't say anything. He could tell from the gray-clothed woman's eyes that she didn't believe that he had brought Xiao Lang and the other two here. Xiao Lang felt a little awkward. Just as he was about to explain, Zhuowen's eyes indicated that he didn't need to say anything. Zhuowen's signal with his eyes was naturally seen by the gray-clothed woman. The gray-clothed woman took this signal as an embarrassing action of the white-clothed young man in front of her after his lie was seen through. She felt a little contempt in her heart. The gray-clothed woman's reaction was mainly due to the fact that Zhuowen's aura was too weak. It was only at the 7th level of the illusory sky realm. This was also the reason why the gray-clothed woman had a preconceived notion that the white-clothed young man before her was definitely not strong enough. Chapter 23:34. Tang Ruqing, when you entered the island, you should have been registered, right? I believe you will soon be assigned cave residences. The gray-robed woman looked at Xiao Lang and the others. Registered? No, we came in directly. We didn't meet anyone on the way, Xiao Lang said in surprise. The gray-robed woman frowned slightly and said, "How is that possible? There are always 2 guards at the end of the bridge. When you entered the island, you were recorded by those 2 guards. How is it possible that you didn't meet them?" Xiao Lang spread his hands and said, "We did see 2 cave residences at the end of the bridge. However, there was no one there, so we came in by ourselves." The gray-robed woman pondered for a moment and sighed softly, "You can stay in my cave residence first. Since the guards aren't here, something might have happened. I will go and ask around. You should know that if you live on the island without being registered, you will easily be treated as an alien. At that time, other cultivators on the island will denounce you." Xiao Lang and the others looked at each other and nodded seriously. After all, the gray-robed woman was so cautious that she obviously didn't deceive them. Under the gray-robed woman's lead, the 4 of them entered her cave residence. Through the conversation between the gray-robed woman and Xiao Lang, Yuan learned that the gray-robed woman's name was Tang Ruqing. She was also a rogue cultivator. Her cultivation was at the early stage of the Void Heaven 8th step, but her refining skills were well known throughout the 6 Desires heavenly domain. Zhuan knew that Tang Ruqing didn't have a good impression of him because of Xiao Lang's words at the beginning, so he didn't say much. Tang Ruqing was obviously not an unreasonable woman. When she found that Zhuan was silent, her tone softened a lot, and she didn't show the disdain she had at the beginning. Tang Ruqing's cave residence was very large. There were 7 or 8 rooms inside, and most of them were refining materials. She casually tidied up and chose 4 rooms for Zhuan, Xiao Lang, and the others to live in. By the way, since the four of you passed the second checkpoint, you should have a corresponding reward. Do you want to go to the center of the island with me to receive the reward? Tang Ruqing looked at Zhuowen and the others and asked. That's good too. If we can obtain rare materials, I hope you can help us a little, Xiao Lang said with a smile. Tang Ruqing smiled and said, there's no need to say such things between friends. By the way, Miss Tang, the four of us are unfamiliar faces. When we go out, I'm afraid we'll be recognized by others. Zhuowen voiced his concern. Tang Ruqing smiled faintly. Don't worry. Most of the cultivators who enter this place are stubborn. All they think about is how to pass the third stage. They don't have time to chat, so most of the cultivators don't know each other. Even if you are unfamiliar faces, it is impossible to arouse the suspicion of other cultivators. Moreover, most of the cultivators here are in seclusion. It will be difficult for you to meet them on the road, unless it is the guard of the bridge or that Ancestor Lu. When Tang Ruqing mentioned Ancestor Lu, Yun saw a hint of reverence in her eyes. It seemed that the Ancestor Lu she was talking about was not a simple person. Let's go. As long as there are no unfamiliar caves here, we won't attract the attention of others. Now, follow me to the center of the island. As Tang Ruqing spoke, he led Zhuowen, Xiao Lang and the other two towards the center of the island in the depths of the valley. While Tang Ruqing's group of 5 were heading towards the center of the island, in the middle of the valley, there was a hidden cave dwelling hidden within the waterfall. Inside the cave, the slightly plump cultivator was trembling as he knelt on one knee. In front of him, there was a stone pillar. The top of the stone pillar was as smooth as a mirror, and a stalwart figure was sitting cross-legged on it. Beside the stone pillar, a beautiful figure suddenly stood there without saying a word. What happened at the bridge? The stalwart figure sitting cross-legged on the stone pillar was a rather young man. He had a pair of beautiful phoenix eyes, red lips, and white teeth. He was a rare handsome man. The slightly plump cultivator hurriedly said, Ancestor Lu, it's actually like this. Judith and I have always been dutifully guarding the bridge, but today, I discovered that there were terrifying battle fluctuations coming from the other side of the bridge. The entire bridge was shaking. In order to find out the reason, and for the safety of the other fellow Taoists on the island, we risked our lives to see what was going on in front of the bridge. We didn't go far before we saw a challenger fighting with Sam. After all, we are fellow Taoists. When the challenger was fighting with Sam, we were quite worried. We were eager to save people, so we went to help. However, Sam was too powerful. Not only did he injure me, Judith also died. At this point, the slightly plump cultivator didn't continue. He knew that there was no need to say what happened next. Ancestor Lu had more or less guessed it. What form is Sam in? Ancestor Lu asked indifferently. The slightly plump cultivator's eyes flickered as he forced a smile and said, It's in the form of an animal. However, before he could finish his words, he was struck in the chest by a huge force and was sent flying, crashing into the rock wall behind him. If Sam was in the form of an animal, would you be so afraid? Ancestor Lu said indifferently. The slightly plump cultivator hurriedly knelt down and said, Ancestor Lu is indeed perceptive. Sam is in human form. What happened to the challenger? Ancestor Lu asked with interest. This subordinate ran away, but before I left, Sam completely suppressed the challenger. I'm afraid it's over. The slightly plump cultivator said cautiously. Ancestor Lu nodded. He had experienced how strong Sam was in human form. If he hadn't been lucky enough at that time, he might have died at Sam's hands. Ancestor Lu was quite interested that the challenger could attract the attention of Sam in human form. As for whether that cultivator could also defeat Sam in human form, he also felt that it was very unlikely. You can leave. I won't nominate any more guards for the bridge. Ancestor Lu said rather heroically. The slightly plump cultivator trembled. He looked up at the man on the stone pillar excitedly and said, Ancestor Lu, could it be that you— Yes, I'm coming out of seclusion. Ancestor Lu smiled faintly and slowly stood up with his hands behind his back. There was a soul-stirring aura lingering around his body. Congratulations, Ancestor Lu. The slightly plump cultivator hurriedly bowed on the ground and then left the cave abode with excitement. The slightly plump cultivator knew very well what it meant for Ancestor Lu to come out of seclusion. It meant that he was going to challenge the third level. Moreover, Ancestor Lu had said that if he came out of seclusion, he would lead the cultivators on the island to the third island. He would never go back on his words. It was precisely because of Ancestor Lu's promise and the fact that he was indeed the most talented cultivator on this island and had the deepest understanding of space-time law that the cultivators on the island unanimously regarded him as their leader. Moreover, most of the cultivators' resources were given to Ancestor Lu so that he could quickly comprehend the power of space-time law. If he could create a space-time law ability, it would naturally be best. Ancestor Lu carried the high hopes of many cultivators on the island for the arrival of this day. Chapter 23:35. Space-Time Core. After the chubby cultivator left, Patriarch Lu's gaze finally landed on the beautiful figure beside the stone pillar. His eyes were filled with infatuation. The figure was an extremely beautiful woman. She was like an otherworldly fairy who stood aloof from the world. Miss Xiangjuan, I've obtained the space-time core for you. Once we leave the river of space-time quicksand, this will be my betrothal gift to you. If Miss Xiangjuan thinks it's not enough, I'll also obtain the space-time key for you, Patriarch Lu said with infatuation. The beautiful woman before him was no stranger to Zhuan. She was Yao Xiangjuan, whom he had met once before. Yao Xiangjuan looked at Patriarch Lu indifferently and said, "That will have to wait until you obtain the space-time key. I can't make this decision. Only my master can." Patriarch Lu laughed and said, "Both the space-time core and the space-time key are good things. As long as I give them to your master and the Six Desires Palace as betrothal gifts, I don't think they will refuse. Besides, you and I are well matched. Although the Lu Shrine is not as strong as the Six Desires Palace, it is still one of the top forces in the Six Desires Heavenly region. I, Patriarch Lu, am the successor of the Lu Shrine. I believe that I am worthy of you, Xiangjuan." Yao Xiangjuan continued to look on coldly. There was a trace of disgust in her beautiful eyes. Looking at the high-spirited Patriarch Lu, Yao Xiangjuan thought of the man who had carried her through the river of time. I wonder how he is now. Is he still lingering in the space-time law zone? I wonder if he will blame me for leaving without saying goodbye. Thinking of this, Yao Xiangjuan could not help but be absent-minded. The high-spirited Patriarch Lu's gaze fell on Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful face. When he saw that Yao Xiangjuan was absent-minded, he frowned but did not say anything. In the center of the island, there was still a stone pillar. The surface of the stone pillar was carved with many complicated patterns and patterns. Xiao Lang, Xiao Yin, and Xiao Fu all went forward to communicate with the stone pillar. The three of them had only received a broken part of the space-time roulette. It was basically worthless. Tang Ruqing's eyes were filled with doubt. In any case, these three people had passed the second stage. Why were their rewards so trashy? Or was there something wrong with the stone pillars? When Zhuan arrived in front of the stone pillar, Tang Ruqing couldn't help but recall Xiao Lang's words. He muttered in a low voice, "Could it be that what Xiao Lang said was true? The one who brought them here was really this Zhuan? Let's see what his rewards are first before making a conclusion." After Zhuan communicated with the stone pillar, a secret chamber appeared beneath the stone pillar. Next, a pile of components of the space-time roulette was revealed. Moreover, every single one of these components was the absolute core of the space-time roulette, unlike the severely damaged components of the space-time roulette that Xiao Lang and the other two possessed. Space-time core. This guy actually got the space-time core as a reward. What did he do to get the space-time core as a reward? Tang Ruqing's gaze fell on a transparent crystal the size of half a palm that was suspended among the many parts. This crystal contained rich space-time rule power, and Tang Ruqing could not help but exclaim in surprise. Space-time void. Zhuowen's eyes narrowed, and his attention also fell on the transparent crystal. He quickly recognized that this was the space-time core. When he first entered the bottom of the cliff, he saw Yao Xiangjuan frozen at the bottom of the sea. She was holding a space-time core in her hand, so he was no stranger to it. Zhuan was the first to put away the space-time core. He was quite excited in his heart. After learning the function of the space-time core from Yao Xiangjuan, Zhuan had been drooling over it. However, because Yao Xiangjuan mysteriously disappeared later, he lost the clues about the space-time core, so he did not pay too much attention to it. Now, he actually got the space-time core here by chance. It was definitely an unexpected surprise. Tang Ruqing watched enviously as Zhuan put away the space-time core. Naturally, he no longer doubted the authenticity of what Xiao Lang said before. Zhuan could get such a valuable reward. Obviously, the island assessed him as the one who contributed the most during the challenge. Otherwise, it would be impossible to get so many rewards. I really didn't expect Brother Zhuo to be so secretive. I was rude just now. Zhuan was immersed in excitement when he heard Tang Ruqing's sour words. Miss Tang, you don't have to say that. It was just a misunderstanding. I heard that Miss Tang is a refiner. I don't know if Miss Tang can help me refine a small space-time roulette. In terms of remuneration, this Zhuan will not be stingy. Zhuan smiled. Tang Ruqing looked at Zhuan and said seriously, the price I ask for is not cheap. You have to be prepared. Don't worry, Miss Tang. As long as it is a price this Zhuo can accept, this Zhuo will definitely not frown. Zhuowen said straightforwardly. Very straightforward. Tang Ruqing laughed. Tang Ruqing took the 4 people back to the cave residence, and Tang Ruqing reached a deal with Yun. Tang Ruqing helped Zhuan refine a small space-time roulette, and Zhuan needed to lend her the space-time core to study for a while. The magic of the space-time core was well known. The most important part of the space-time roulette was the space-time core. Tang Ruqing was an extremely powerful refiner. In addition to the space-time core, she could also refine the space-time roulette. However, the space-time core was different. It represented the highest level of refiners in that era. Even now, the space-time core definitely had extremely high research value. Tang Ruqing knew that if she could study the space-time core, it was not impossible for him to refine a fake space-time core. However, the space-time core was too rare. There were only 2 space-time cores in the Quicksand River. Tang Ruqing knew that one of them was in the hands of Ancestor Lu. With Ancestor Lu's personality, he definitely wouldn't let her study it. Zhuowen being able to obtain the space-time core was a pleasant surprise for her. While Tang Ruqing was in seclusion to refine the small space-time roulette, Xiao Lang and the others were also in seclusion in their own rooms. Zhuan was locked in their own room. Zhuan took out the phagocytosis, and then took out 3 Dao fruits. His eyes revealed a fervent and crazy look. The phagocytosis that had fused with 2 Dao fruits was indeed much more powerful than before. In particular, the power of the heavenly Dao rhyme circulating on its surface was also very powerful. It was also very harmful to the creatures in this trial ground. At present, it was not very possible for him to break through. The only way to increase his strength, besides comprehending more space-time rules, was to fuse the Dao fruits into the phagocytosis again to increase the power of the phagocytosis. Let's try fusing the Dao fruits. Back then, Yuan had seen Kuang Li fuse the Dao fruits into the phagocytosis with his own eyes. He knew the specific steps. As for whether it would succeed or not, he felt a little uncertain. Chapter 23:36. Lu Zhu. 3 days later, Yuan walked out of his room with excitement in his eyes. He held the phagocytosis in his right hand. The surface of this ordinary-looking phagocytosis was surrounded by extremely dense heavenly Dao energy. This heavenly Dao energy was even denser and stronger than before. During these 3 days, Yuan had been in seclusion to fuse with the Dao fruit and enter the phagocytosis. Originally, he had only intended to give it a try. He had never expected that he would succeed in the end. After fusing with the second Dao fruit, the phagocytosis's attacks contained extremely powerful heavenly Dao energy. Its power was much stronger than before. However, when Zhuan was about to fuse with the third Dao fruit, the phagocytosis showed signs of rejection. Zhuan knew that this was probably because the phagocytosis was unable to withstand the heavenly Dao energy of the third Dao fruit and was resisting. After all, the phagocytosis was still in a sealed state. Juan had only just unlocked the 3,000 seals on the phagocytosis. He was far from being able to unleash the true power of the phagocytosis. The heavenly Tao energy within the Tao fruit was extremely terrifying. Ordinary void sky divine artifacts would not be able to withstand the heavenly Tao energy. Only a king devourer's supreme treasure like the phagocytosis could barely withstand the heavenly Tao energy within the Tao fruit. However, it seemed like it could only withstand the power of 2 Tao fruits. If he wanted to fuse with the 3rd Tao fruit, Juan knew that he would have to unlock more of the phagocytosis's restrictions. Only then would the phagocytosis be able to withstand the heavenly Tao energy of the 3rd Tao fruit. Juan glanced at Tang Ruqing's room and saw that the door was tightly shut. He knew that Tang Ruqing was probably refining a small space-time roulette, so he did not intend to disturb him. "Zhu, you've come out of seclusion. Do you want to take a walk with me? I heard that it's very lively outside." The door to the side opened and Xiao Lang walked out. He smiled at Juan. "What's going on outside?" Juan asked in surprise. Xiao Lang smiled and said, "I heard that Ancestor Lu has come out of seclusion. Because of this, all the cultivators on the island have come out of seclusion." "I heard that Ancestor Lu has come out of seclusion, which means that Ancestor Lu is preparing to break through the 3rd checkpoint. Don't you think it will be lively outside?" Juan revealed a look of understanding. Tang Ruqing had already mentioned Ancestor Lu to them before. It was said that Patriarch Lu was the most talented expert here. His comprehension of the laws of spacetime was something that the other cultivators on the island could not hope to match. It was precisely because of this that all the cultivators on the island had high hopes for Ancestor Lu. In addition, Ancestor Lu had once promised that if he mastered the space-time law in the future, he would definitely kill the guardian of the 3rd checkpoint and bring everyone over. Therefore, Ancestor Lu was naturally elected as the leader of the island. Even some experts with similar strength to Ancestor Lu took the initiative to acknowledge Ancestor Lu as their leader, bowing their heads in submission. Now that Ancestor Lu came out of seclusion, he was bound to fulfill the promise back then. How could the others not be excited? "Where are the brothers Xiao Yin and Xiao Fu?" Yuan asked in surprise. "The 2 of them are still in seclusion? I happen to have some time and want to go watch the show. Why don't Brother Zhuo come along?" Xiao Lang looked at Zhuan expectantly. Zhuan pondered for a moment before finally nodding and saying with a smile, "That's fine too." Since Ancestor Lu was known as the expert with the deepest comprehension of the laws of space-time on the island, Zhuan wanted to see just how strong Ancestor Lu was. Moreover, if Ancestor Lu wanted to challenge the 3rd checkpoint, Zhuan was looking forward to seeing what kind of existence the guardian of the 3rd checkpoint was. Zhuan was definitely going to challenge the 3rd checkpoint. If he could see the guardian's methods in advance, it would definitely be of great benefit to Zhuan when he challenged the 3rd checkpoint in the future. In the middle of the valley, there was a large open space. At this moment, a high platform had been set up in the open space, and a proud figure was standing on the platform. Below the platform was a bustling crowd. Although the valley was not big, the number of cultivators here was not small. Looking from a distance below the high platform, there were no less than 100 people. Zhuan and Xiao Lang came to the open space below the high platform and stood in an inconspicuous corner, silently looking at the proud figure on the high platform. Zhuan knew that the proud figure should be Ancestor Lu. Ancestor Lu looked young and had an extremely handsome face. His hands were behind his back, and the arrogance in his eyes was very strong. Zhuan frowned slightly. He did not like the arrogance in Ancestor Lu's eyes. This kind of arrogance was full of condescension and could even be said to be a little conceited. Zhuan only glanced at Ancestor Lu, but his gaze fell on a beautiful figure not far behind Ancestor Lu, and his expression changed. This figure was an extremely beautiful woman, and Zhuan was no stranger to her. Because this woman was Yao Xiangjuan, whom he had met in the space law area. Zhuan remembered that Yao Xiangjuan's body was frozen in time at the bottom of the sea. At that time, Yao Xiangjuan was holding a time hollow in her hand, which meant that Yao Xiangjuan had another time hollow in her hand. Zhuan only glanced at Yao Xiangjuan and then withdrew his gaze. He was not familiar with Yao Xiangjuan, so he did not intend to greet her. Of course, if the person who appeared in front of Zhuowen was not Yao Xiangjuan, but Yao Xiangjuan's brother, Zhuowen might go forward to greet him and return the necklace to Yao Xiangjuan. Speaking of the necklace, Nguyen felt a little guilty in his heart. Now that the necklace was damaged, it would not be easy to repair it. That necklace had an extremely strong vitality and had saved him several times. He knew that it was definitely a supreme treasure. Yao Xiangjuan gave this thing to Zhuowen, and Zhuowen knew that he owed Yao Xiangjuan a lot of favors. The moment Zhuowen withdrew his gaze, Yao Xiangjuan, who was standing behind the high platform, felt something, and her beautiful eyes could not help but fall on the remote corner where Zhuowen was. When she saw Zhuowen, her delicate body trembled, and she said in her heart, "Why is he here? How did he know the route here?" Yao Xiangjuan's heart was in a mess. This place was not easy to enter. Without the guidance of a map, ordinary people could not enter at all, but Zhuowen had come in, which made Yao Xiangjuan suspicious. At the same time, Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes gently fell on Zhuowen's neck, and when she found that there was no necklace on Zhuowen's neck, her beautiful eyes dimmed. "It seems that he did not accept my kindness. Well, after all, I broke my promise first and abandoned him. It is pardonable for him to do this." Yao Xiangjuan whispered in her heart, "Ancestor Lu, congratulations on coming out of seclusion." A figure suddenly rushed to the high platform, and landed in front of Ancestor Lu. Ancestor Lu looked at the figure in front of him with a cautious gaze, cupped his fists, and replied, "This is all thanks to everyone. If it were not for everyone's help, this Ancestor Lu would not have been able to reach grand completion of the space-time law. I'm afraid that I would still be an unknown nobody." Appearing in front of Ancestor Lu was a middle-aged man with a white face and no beard. Zhuowen's gaze fell on the middle-aged man with a solemn expression. Chapter 23:37. Shenzhen, it's Shenzhen. I didn't expect him to come out of seclusion as well. It seems that he really values Ancestor Lu. Shenzhen's strength is definitely the strongest on this island. It's just that his usage of the space-time rule is not as good as Ancestor Lu's, so their strength is on par. If it was outside, Shenzhen's strength would definitely be much stronger than Ancestor Lu's. There's no need to say that. Since we're trapped here, we have to abide by the rules here. Shenzhen is no exception. However, I heard that in order to escape, Shenzhen plans to join forces with Ancestor Lu to break through the third trial. The surrounding discussions were extremely noisy, and Zhuowen also found out from the discussions that the powerful middle-aged man in front of him was called Shenzhen and was a half-step void sky ninth-step expert. On the high platform, Shenzhen did not care about the discussions of the people below the high platform. Instead, he smiled at Ancestor Lu and said, "Ancestor Lu, the main credit is still your talent. If you don't have talent, what's the use of resources?" Ancestor Lu smiled slightly. Although his words were modest, the pride in his eyes did not decrease. "Ancestor Lu, when do you plan to pass the third trial?" Shenzhen suddenly asked. As soon as Shenzhen asked this question, it immediately attracted the attention of many cultivators present. The originally noisy crowd below also became completely silent. Everyone had come out of seclusion and gathered here for the purpose of this third checkpoint. Ancestor Lu was the cultivator with the highest chance of passing the third trial. Many cultivators here hoped that Ancestor Lu would make a move as soon as possible. Ancestor Lu smiled and said, "I've thought about this matter. Let's wait for half a month. Although I've already come out of seclusion, I still need to consolidate my strength. Only then will I have more confidence." As soon as Ancestor Lu's words came out, although many cultivators revealed looks of disappointment, they all smiled and agreed. Ancestor Lu is right. Only by consolidating your strength can you unleash even more power. At that time, your chances of passing the third trial will be even higher. It's only half a month. We've waited for so long, so there's no harm in waiting for another half a month. The smile at the corners of Ancestor Lu's mouth grew even wider. Soon after, he cupped his hands together towards Shenzhen and said, "Elder Shenzhen, you must lend me a hand half a month later. At that time, we will kill the guardian of the third checkpoint and benefit the brothers of the island. As soon as these words were spoken, the cultivators below the high platform were stirred. Shen Jian also cupped his fists excitedly and said, "Rest assured, Ancestor Lu. This Shen will definitely help Ancestor Lu kill that guardian. At that time, all of our brothers will be able to leave this damned place." Ancestor Lu nodded and left with Yao Xiangjuan. Before Yao Xiangjuan left, she glanced at Juan. When she found that Juan was just lowering his head in contemplation, her beautiful eyes dimmed. After Ancestor Lu left, the surrounding cultivators also dispersed. "Brother Zhuo, let's go," Xiao Lang reminded him. Juan frowned slightly, nodded, and left with Xiao Lang. After returning to Tang Ruqing's cave mansion, Juan went into seclusion. He planned to use this half a month to start absorbing the space-time rule power of the second island. The space-time law on this island was gentler than the first island. Zhuan could easily absorb it and verify his own understanding of the space-time law. In just half a month, Zhuan's understanding of the space-time law had improved by another level. There was no doubt that Zhuan's space-time law had reached the great accomplishment level like Ancestor Lu. Moreover, Zhuan had also comprehended his own space-time divine ability. If he really faced Ancestor Lu would definitely be defeated. Of course, Zhuan also knew that he could comprehend the space-time divine ability mainly because of the mysterious spaces setting sun and the trace of space-time power in his body. If he didn't have both, Zhuan wouldn't be able to comprehend the space-time divine ability in a short time. When Zhuan left the room again, he found that the restriction on Tang Ruqing's door had been opened. Through the gap in the door, Zhuan found that Tang Ruqing was playing with the space-time hollow in the room. Perhaps because she found Zhuan, Tang Ruqing turned her face and looked at Zhuan with a smile and said, "Brother Zhuo, you've finally come out of seclusion." Zhuan nodded and said, "Miss Tang, do you know about the space-time roulette?" Tang Ruqing smiled slightly and flicked her finger. Suddenly, a palm-sized disc appeared in her palm, and she handed it to Zhuan. "The space-time roulette parts you obtained are all core parts, and they are basically complete, so I didn't encounter much difficulty in refining them. You can rename them. The space-time roulette is too famous, and I'm afraid it will cause trouble," Tang Ruqing said. Zhuan agreed and said, "Let's call it the space-time wheel in the future." "Then, Miss Tang, shouldn't you return my space-time core to me?" Tang Ruqing rolled her eyes at Zhuan before handing the space-time core back to Zhuan. She said, "The speed of your space-time wheel is definitely unrivaled. If it's combined with this space-time hollow, I don't think there are any flying god artifacts that can match the speed of the space-time wheel. Even experts who have reached the 9th step of the illusionary heavens would struggle." "Ruqing, Brother Zhuo, you've all come out of seclusion. Let's go watch Ancestor Lu make it through today. What do you think?" Xiao Lang, Xiao Fu and Xiao Yin walked out of the room as well. When they saw Zhuan and Tang Ruqing, Xiao Lang called out first. "Brother Xiao, we were planning to go even if you didn't say anything. Ancestor Lu is probably very confident about making it through the third trial. If he can kill the guardian, all of us will have the right to enter the third island," Tang Ruqing said excitedly. The three brothers chuckled. Their eyes were filled with excitement as well. Clearly, they were very eager to see Ancestor Lu defeat the guardian of the third trial. As they spoke, the group of 5 left the cave and walked towards the stone pillar at the center of the island. At this moment, the area around the stone pillar at the center of the island was bustling with noise and excitement. All the cultivators on the island had come out of seclusion. Everyone stared at the 3 figures in front of the stone pillar with bright eyes. The 3 figures were Ancestor Lu, Shen Jian and Yao Xiangjuan. Shen Jian stood beside Ancestor Lu and his gaze fell on Yao Xiangjuan. He said in a deep voice, "Ancestor Lu, although this woman's strength is not bad, she's still not up to the standard. Why did you bring her here?" Shen Jian's words were not polite at all. The implication was that he thought Yao Xiangjuan would be a burden to them. Ancestor Lu didn't care at all. He transmitted his voice, "Senior Shen Jian, you don't know. Xiangjuan isn't as simple as you think because she has the space-time hollow in her body. Moreover, she has mastered the method to use it." Shen Jian's expression immediately became serious. he replied. Ancestor Lu, is what you said true? Chapter 23:38. Joining hands to break through. Only then did Shenjian's expression look a little better. He was most afraid that Yao Xiangjuan would drag them down. But now that Ancestor Lu said that Yao Xiangjuan could control the space-time core, it would be of great help to them in passing the third level. The space-time core contained an extremely powerful space-time power. If Yao Xiangjuan could really control the power of the space-time core, her strength would definitely not be inferior to the two of them. With Yao Xiangjuan, the two of them would be like tigers that had grown wings. Their chances of passing the third level would greatly increase. Ancestor Lu ignored the surprised Shenjian and cupped his fists towards the surrounding people, saying, Ancestor Lu is indebted to everyone for thinking highly of me and electing me as the leader of the island. As the leader, I am very clear that I must benefit the brothers below. Today, I plan to join forces with Senior Shenjian and Miss Xiangjuan to pass through the third level. After I chop off the head of the guardian, it will be the time for everyone to pass through the third level. Ancestor Lu's words were powerful and his cadence immediately infected the emotions of the people below. After saying that, Ancestor Lu turned around and looked at Shenjian and Yao Xiangjuan. Then, the three of them stretched out their hands and landed on the surface of the stone pillar. Suddenly, the surface of the stone pillar erupted with a dazzling white light. Then, the stone pillar began to break apart. In the end, it actually formed a long flight of stairs in the air. This flight of stairs stretched across the sky. As one walked up the stairs, one could not see what was at the end of the stairs. Is this the entrance to the third level? Xiao Lang, who was beside Zhuowen, clicked his tongue in wonder. Ancestor Lu and the other two did not hesitate and continued to climb up the stairs. Their speed was neither slow nor slow. After the three of them reached a certain height, the people below also followed and stepped onto the stairs. Let's go in together. This time, Ancestor Lu plans to lead us through the third level. With Ancestor Lu and the others in front, we are still very safe. Tang Ruqing smiled. You really believe that Ancestor Lu will succeed? Zhuowen asked in surprise. Tang Ruqing smiled indifferently and said, regardless of whether he succeeds or not, Ancestor Lu has become the final hope of everyone on this island. This can be said to be everyone's last battle. If Ancestor Lu succeeds, then everyone will enter the third island. If he fails, then everyone will die in the checkpoint. Which of the cultivators on this island hasn't been trapped here for hundreds or thousands of years? There are even some who have been trapped here for tens of thousands of years. Everyone has long since grown tired of this life. I might as well give it a try. Zhuowen had a complicated look in his eyes. It seemed that Tang Ruqing and the others in the archipelago had already decided to either succeed or die trying. Either he cleared the stage in one go, or he was willing to die and end it all. The stairs looked very long, but when everyone walked up, they realized that they had reached the end after walking for a short distance. This was a huge white circular platform. The surface of the circular platform was made of sparkling and translucent white jade. It looked pure white and flawless, and was quite pleasing to the eye. At the very front of the platform, Ancestor Lu, Yao Xiangjuan, and Shenjian stood side by side. The crowd behind them also stopped in their tracks, their gazes blazing as they looked at the backs of Ancestor Lu and the other two. On the platform, there was nothing else except for the crowd. However, everyone wasn't as relaxed as they imagined. They were all secretly on guard against the terrifying things that might happen around them. Suddenly, a gust of cold wind swept out from the platform. It silently bypassed Ancestor Lu and the other two and rushed into the crowd behind them. Poochie! Poochie! In just an instant, several people at the front were caught off guard and were torn to pieces by the power of the cold wind. Bursts of bloody mist erupted, and they couldn't be more dead. The faces of the others changed drastically, and they hurriedly took out their respective divine artifacts to resist this strange cold wind. However, this cold wind contained a rich power of the laws of space and time. Most of the surrounding people only knew a little about the laws of space and time. Among them, there were even fewer who had mastered the laws of space and time. In just an instant, they were utterly defeated and in chaos. Juan, who was hiding in the crowd, frowned slightly. He knew that this should be the third stage's guardian secretly taking action. With just this move, Juan could see that the third stage's guardian was definitely much stronger than the second stage's guardian, Sam, and the first stage's guardian, the Time Frog King. It was a tricky opponent. The moment the cold wind attacked, a black and white light appeared in front of the platform, and a sturdy figure was born from the light. This figure looked like a human, and it was 3 feet tall. It was much taller than everyone present, like a small giant. When the light faded, a terrifying sound of breaking wind resounded. From the black and white light, the tall figure suddenly rushed out. It was so fast that it seemed as if the surrounding space was nothing in front of him. "Miss Xiangjuan, what are you doing?" Ancestor Lu and Shenzhen's gazes were grave. Both of them were on alert, their attention firmly fixed on the tall figure that was rushing over, but Ancestor Lu quickly noticed that Yao Xiangjuan, who was beside him, was actually rushing towards the crowd at the back, and could not help but shout out. "The others have been ambushed. I have to go and rescue them." Yao Xiangjuan's beautiful eyes fell on Juan in the crowd. Her heart trembled, and she planned to rush over to rescue him. Unfortunately, she was caught by Ancestor Lu. "Miss Xiangjuan, you will get us killed. The guardian of the third stage has already appeared. If you continue to act like this, we will all die here. Please consider the overall situation." Shen Jian coldly snorted. He took out a horsetail whisk with his right hand, and with a gentle wave, white long hair crazily grew, blocking in front of Yao Xiangjuan. Yao Xiangjuan frowned, and in the end, she could only turn around. The reason why she was so anxious about the crowd was naturally not because she really cared about them, but because she was worried about Juan. However, after thinking that Juan was not simple, her worry gradually calmed down. At the same time, she secretly said that she was too impatient. Boom! When Yao Xiangjuan came back to her senses, the tall black figure had already rushed in front of the 3 people. Then, she heard the muffled groans of Shen Jian and Ancestor Lu. And Yao Xiangjuan finally saw the true face of the guardian of the third stage. The tall figure had a robust human body, but it had a head similar to a hawk's. Its hands were also abnormal. The figure had a purple shield in its left hand and a sharp sword in its right hand. Its feet were like eagle claws, covered with barbs. At this moment, the guardian suddenly raised its right hand and fiercely slammed it down. A storm rose around the guardian. Ancestor Lu and Shenzhen used all of their strength to block the attack of the gatekeeper. However, from the reddened faces of the two, it could be seen that this attack was not easy to bear. "Xiangjuan, why are you still in a daze?" Ancestor Lu roared. Yao Xiangjuan did not dare to be negligent. With a wave of her hand, she immediately took out the space-time hollow. Then, she held the space-time hollow in her left hand and quickly formed a complicated seal with her right hand. Then, the space-time hollow erupted with a terrifying space-time power. A white beam of light shot out from the space-time hollow and heavily fell on the guardian. Chapter 2339. The Gatekeeper. After the gatekeeper was forced back, Ancestor Lu and Shun Jian breathed a sigh of relief. "Xiangjuan, don't be absent-minded again. Otherwise, we'll die here." Ancestor Lu looked at Yao Xiangjuan with dissatisfaction. Yao Xiangjuan didn't say anything. Her beautiful eyes shifted slightly as she looked at the crowd behind her. After discovering that the figure she was concerned about was fine, she relaxed and said, "Ancestor Lu, Senior Shenzhen, it was Xiangjuan's fault just now. Xiangjuan won't let it happen again." Ancestor Lu and Shenzhen's expressions relaxed when they saw Yao Xiangjuan's good attitude. Ancestor Lu said with a pleasant expression, "That's for the best. Be careful, this beast is about to attack again." Ancestor Lu's face changed drastically. His right hand formed a claw and blasted out as powerful space-time laws spread out. Shen Jian didn't hesitate and waved the horsetail whisk in his hand. Instantly, the terrifying white fur turned into the most loyal guard and blocked in front of Ancestor Lu, protecting him at all times. Rumble! The gatekeeper coldly snorted and swung the sword in his right hand. Space dislocated and time collapsed, and Ancestor Lu's attack was instantly broken. Boom. However, when the gatekeeper's attack finally landed on the white fur formed by the horsetail whisk, the gatekeeper's figure trembled and blocked the attack. Shen Jian's attack succeeded and he didn't spare the gatekeeper. With a twist of his right hand, the horsetail whisk instantly became like a whirlwind and sealed the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper was instantly enveloped by the sea of white fur of the horsetail whisk, and his figure was difficult to see. Boom. Boom. Unfortunately, the horsetail whisk's envelopment didn't last for long. A terrifying energy fluctuation swept out from it and tore the white fur of the horsetail whisk into pieces. Shen Jian groaned and his face turned pale as he stared solemnly at the tall figure that was unscathed. "This gatekeeper is very strong?" Ancestor Lu said in a deep voice. "Let's join forces and kill this gatekeeper." Shen Jian's eyes were filled with killing intent. He knew very well that no matter how strong this gatekeeper was, they had to kill him. Otherwise, none of them would be able to pass. "Let's attack together." Patriarch Lu nodded. He stomped his right foot and formed a seal with both hands. The power of space-time rules condensed between his hands, making his hands comparable to the most powerful weapons in the world. Shen Jian held the horsetail whisk in his hand and followed closely behind. His divine power surged and coupled with his initial comprehension of the space-time law, his strength was even stronger than Patriarch Lu's. Yao Xiangjuan, on the other hand, stood behind the two of them. The time hollow floated in front of her chest, and her slender jade-like hands were plucking the strings of a zither, slowly plucking them. The time hollow suddenly erupted with an extremely terrifying and sharp aura. Pure space-time power surged out of the space-time heart, turning into a white ray of light that shot straight towards the gatekeeper. Boom, boom. The guardian remained fearless. He held the shield in his left hand while he suddenly slashed out with the sword in his right hand. Instantly, sword chi that covered the sky were like flowing lights that carried the laws of time and space as they smashed out in a vast array. Ancestor Lu, Shen Jian, and Yao Xiangjuan used all of their skills to block the guardian's sword chi. Then, the four of them began to fight. While Ancestor Lu and the other three were fighting, the crowd behind them was also quite chaotic. The sinister wind was extremely tough as it shuttled through the crowd. Every time it shuttled, the sinister wind could take away a few people's lives. For a moment, the crowd was in chaos and everyone was in a state of panic. Zhuowen frowned slightly. The sinister wind contained the laws of time and space, and the people around him only knew a little about the laws of time and space. That was why they were so embarrassed by the sinister wind. Zhuowen snorted coldly. His right hand suddenly made a grabbing motion and caught the sinister wind that shuttled through the air. The crowd, who were originally hurriedly dodging, naturally saw Zhuowen's move and all of them were surprised. Everyone had thoroughly experienced the terror of the sinister wind. They did not dare to touch it at all. However, the unfamiliar white-clothed youth in front of them not only easily caught the sinister wind, but also seemed to be unharmed. Everyone was not a fool. They all knew that the white-clothed youth in front of them was not simple. Therefore, everyone approached Zhuon. Some of them simply hid behind Zhuon like Tang Ruqing, Xiao Lang, and the others. Zhuon did not pay much attention to the petty actions of the others. Instead, he clenched his right hand. The power of the laws of time and space burst out and the sinister wind in his hand was instantly torn to pieces. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. The moment Zhuon tore apart the sinister wind in his hand, the remaining 8 sinister winds seemed to be angered and rushed toward Zhuon. Zhuon's eyes were solemn. He was not afraid of one sinister wind, but if 8 sinister winds came together, even he would not dare to underestimate them. Zhuowen's hands formed into claws and grabbed 2 of the sinister winds. Then, he stomped his feet and stepped on the other 2 sinister winds and leaped up. The moment he leaped, the 2 sinister winds in his hand were crushed by him. Then, his hands swept out again like lightning. Bang bang bang. In just an instant, Zhuon shattered the remaining sinister winds and landed lightly on the ground. The group of people hiding behind Zhuowen were all stunned. None of them had expected that there would be such an expert hidden among them. This person's mastery of the laws of time and space has probably reached the minor accomplishment stage. I really did not expect that there would be such an expert besides Xinjian and Ancestor Lu. This person is very unfamiliar. I don't think I have seen him before. However, to be able to comprehend the laws of time and space to the minor accomplishment stage, this person is amazing. Although this person's strength may not be as strong as Xinjian and Ancestor Lu, he is definitely not someone we can compare to. The crowd discussed animatedly, and they all came out to thank Zhuowen. At the same time, many people were secretly discussing Zhuowen's origin. Of course, in their hearts, the strongest people on the island were actually Xinjian and Ancestor Lu. Among them, Xinjian's cultivation was at the half-step void sky 9th step. Although he had only grasped the laws of time and space to the minor accomplishment stage, his strength was extremely terrifying. An ordinary cultivator with the laws of time and space to the minor accomplishment stage could not compare to him. Ancestor Lu, on the other hand, had already grasped the laws of time and space to the major accomplishment stage. His terrifying strength was definitely far beyond everyone's imagination. Zhuowen stood in place, expressionless, and received everyone's thanks. "You're actually not dead?" Suddenly, a surprised voice sounded. Then, in the crowd not far away, a slightly fat cultivator looked at Zhuowen in surprise. Zhuowen glanced at the slightly fat cultivator indifferently. He naturally recognized this guy. Wasn't he one of the 2 guards on the bridge last time? The slightly fat cultivator's companion, the thin and tall cultivator, was resurrected by Sam, and this guy was so scared that he fled. Zhuowen still remembered this vividly. Chapter 2340. Taking turns to fight, the chubby cultivator sensed that he had made a mistake in his words, and cold sweat dripped down his forehead. He hurriedly waved his hand and said, "Junior spoke rashly. I hope Senior won't forgive me." Zhuowen couldn't be bothered to pay attention to the chubby cultivator. Ever since he knew that this guy had abandoned his companions and fled, Zhuowen didn't have a good impression of him. "Senior, your space-time laws are at least at the initial stage. You should do your part for everyone." The chubby cultivator cautiously approached Zhuowen and probed. The moment the chubby cultivator said that, the surrounding people were all moved, and they looked at Zhuowen with hopeful gazes. Zhuowen sneered and said, "You mean to say that I should also go up and die?" The chubby cultivator's face stiffened, and a chill flashed through his heart. He didn't expect this white-clothed youth to speak so rudely. Zhuowen's words caused many of the surrounding cultivators to be dissatisfied. However, in view of Zhuowen's strength, they didn't dare to say anything. "Brother Zhuo, you're so strong. Why don't you make a move?" Xiao Lang led Tang Ruqing, Xiao Fu, and Xiao Yin to Zhuowen's side and asked cautiously. Zhuowen sighed and said, "Didn't you notice? The guardian of the 3rd checkpoint is completely different from the previous 2. His strength doesn't increase with the number of people entering the checkpoint, but with the number of people attacking him." What? Xiao Lang, Tang Ruqing, and the other 3 looked at each other. They didn't expect the guardian of the 3rd checkpoint to be so different. Tang Ruqing was the first to react and said softly, "Brother Zhuo, are you saying that in a one-on-one fight, we have an advantage?" Zhuowen nodded and said, "That's true. Ancestor Lu and the other 2 joining forces to attack the Guardian wasn't a wise move. Taking turns is the best way. Now that the 3 of them have joined forces, the Guardian's strength has become even stronger." Although it was Zhuowen's first time entering the 3rd checkpoint, Zhuowen could tell that something was amiss with just a glance. Previously, when Ancestor Lu and Xinjian attacked the gatekeeper, Yao Xiangjuan did not attack. The gatekeeper's strength was ordinary, but with Yao Xiangjuan's addition, Zhuowen could clearly feel that the gatekeeper's strength had increased by several times. Therefore, Zhuowen was able to guess this pattern. Zhuowen's voice wasn't loud, but it wasn't soft either. Many people behind him heard it clearly, and a look of understanding appeared on their faces. Some people had also noticed the strange behavior of the gatekeeper, but they didn't pay too much attention to it. On the other hand, the plump cultivator's cheeks were slightly red. His righteous words had turned into a joke. "Then let's have Ancestor Lu and the other 2 withdraw from the battlefield, and then take turns fighting them." Someone in the crowd suddenly suggested. This suggestion was immediately approved and echoed by everyone. Then I'll go inform Ancestor Lu and the others. The chubby cultivator seemed to be trying to snatch the credit. As soon as the crowd lifted him up, he impatiently rushed out. Wait. Zhuowen's face changed slightly. He didn't expect the chubby cultivator to be so impulsive. He actually rushed out directly. The chubby cultivator obviously heard Zhuowen's shout and sneered in his heart. He simply ignored Zhuowen. Ancestor Lu, the gatekeeper of this third level, is different from the previous 2 levels. The more people attacking him, the stronger the gatekeeper. This subordinate thinks that we should take turns fighting them. The chubby cultivator impatiently transmitted his voice. Ancestor Lu, who was originally fighting with the gatekeeper, naturally heard the chubby cultivator's voice transmission and his eyes lit up. He also noticed the abnormality of the gatekeeper. Now that the chubby cultivator had mentioned it, he immediately figured out the connection, so he quickly discussed with Shenjian and Yao Xiangjuan. Zhuowen frowned slightly, looking at the chubby cultivator who came back complacently. He said, "You harmed the 3 of them." Zhuowen knew that this chubby cultivator was Ancestor Lu's confidant, and he, Zhuowen, should have no right to speak in front of Ancestor Lu. Harm them? Are you kidding? Didn't you come up with this theory? I told Ancestor Lu the right way. How can I harm them? Or do you think I stole your credit? The chubby cultivator arrogantly walked past Zhuowen, like a fox borrowing the tiger's might, with a posture of victory. Zhuowen was too lazy to pay attention to this guy, but silently looked at Ancestor Lu, who was preparing to separate in front of him. He could only remind in a clear voice, "It's not appropriate to take turns fighting them. The gatekeeper's strength may not necessarily decline. You'd better not take risks." Ancestor Lu, who was originally planning to act, frowned when he heard Zhuowen's voice. Obviously, he didn't know this white-clothed youth. Shen Jian also had the same expression. On the contrary, when Yao Xiangjuan saw Zhuowen speak, her beautiful eyes loosened and the corner of her mouth revealed a smile. Yao Xiangjuan's expression happened to be seen by Ancestor Lu. The originally hesitant Ancestor Lu's eyes turned cold and he coldly snorted, "Who do you think you are? You want to order us around? Don't pay attention to this person. Senior Shenjian, Xiangjuan, will follow the original plan and take turns fighting them one by one." Hearing this, Zhuowen frowned. He could hear that Ancestor Lu's words were directed at him, but he and Ancestor Lu had never met before. "Ancestor Lu, we should follow this person's advice. I also feel that the gatekeeper's strength will not decline because of us taking turns fighting them one by one. Once the gatekeeper's strength does not decline, we will be defeated in an instant," Yao Xiangjuan said. Ancestor Lu saw that Yao Xiangjuan actually spoke for the white-clothed youth, and his eyes spat fire. He coldly said, "You believe in the fallacy of an unrelated person? Ignorant fool, if you agree with that person, you can leave." Yao Xiangjuan was so angry that her chest violently rose and fell. She didn't expect Ancestor Lu to be so narrow-minded. Just because she leaned toward Zhuowen, Ancestor Lu became so angry. However, she had already made an oath before. This time, she must help Ancestor Lu. If she left now, wouldn't she violate the oath? "Senior Shenjian, I'll go first." Ancestor Lu cupped his fist to Shenjian and ignored Yao Xiangjuan. He took a step forward and the space-time law in his hands shot out like the sharpest silk towards the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper growled and blasted the long sword in his hand towards Ancestor Lu without hesitation. Boom, boom, boom. Suddenly, Ancestor Lu and the gatekeeper were evenly matched. The expected one-sided battle did not occur at all. Ancestor Lu sighed lightly and could not help sneering and ridiculing. "Someone's fallacy is really ridiculous. You have no shame to make such a fallacy." Zhuowen watched all this silently and frowned. He acted as if he did not hear Ancestor Lu's ridicule. "Ha, it's really a fallacy. The purpose of you saying that just now, is it because you don't want us to pass the third level? Or, are you a spy?" The chubby cultivator hurriedly ridiculed, but as soon as he finished speaking, he felt a pain in his chest and spat out a mouthful of blood. He slammed into the ground not far away. "You're very noisy. You're like a fly, buzzing around my ear non-stop." Zhuowen slowly withdrew his fist and did not even look at the chubby cultivator. He stared at the gatekeeper again, feeling that this gatekeeper was a little strange. Chapter 2341. Leave it to Mizhuwen couldn't be bothered to pay attention to these people. He wasn't Ancestor Lu and didn't need their love or support. His goal was simple: to pass the third checkpoint and obtain the space-time key. Not long after, Ancestor Lu retreated and glanced at Yao Xiangjuan. The latter frowned slightly and nodded. Holding the space-time key, she stepped into the air and rushed towards the gatekeeper. Boom, boom, boom. The sounds of battle were endless. Yao Xiangjuan retreated half an hour later, her forehead covered in sweat. Shen Jian rushed out with the horsetail whisk in his hand and replaced Yao Xiangjuan's position, fighting the gatekeeper. Just like that, Ancestor Lu, Shen Jian, and Yao Xiangjuan took turns to fight the gatekeeper, hoping to make the gatekeeper slack off and tire out, causing its battle strength to decrease. The reality was just as the three of them expected. After fighting for a day and a night, the gatekeeper's movements had indeed become sluggish. Ancestor Lu and Shen Jian's eyes lit up. Shen Jian cupped his fists towards Ancestor Lu and said, "Ancestor Lu, I've come to take the gatekeeper's head for you. This gatekeeper can't even withstand a single blow, so there's no need to fear you." As he spoke, Shen Jian quickly approached the gatekeeper. With a shake of the horsetail whisk in his hand, endless white threads turned into a vast ocean and enveloped the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper seemed to be extremely tired. Although it kept struggling, it couldn't break free from the white threads. Instead, the white threads became tighter and tighter. The smile on Shen Jian's face grew wider. Then he put away the horsetail whisk and the white threads condensed into an oval shape. He turned around and slowly walked towards Ancestor Lu. This was an inescapable net that Shen Jian had set up. In Shen Jian's opinion, the gatekeeper couldn't break free. Ancestor Lu laughed. Just as he was about to go up and greet Shen Jian, his body suddenly stiffened and he stared at Shen Jian. The oval-shaped sphere condensed from the white threads behind Shen Jian was smashed to pieces, and the gatekeeper rushed out. At this moment, the guardian's form was different from before. A pair of black wings grew out of the guardian's back. The black feathers looked like they were made of steel. It was extremely strange. With these wings, the guardian's speed was much faster than before. In addition, Shen Jian was not on guard, so the guardian instantly got behind Shen Jian. By the time Shen Jian reacted, the guardian's sword had already pierced through Shen Jian's back. Blood gushed out like a fountain. Shen Jian was not an ordinary person. His heart was penetrated, and his divine soul was locked down by this guardian. He knew that it would be hard for him to escape, so he took out the illusory heavenly bridge and detonated it without hesitation. The moment the illusory sky bridge exploded, Ancestor Lu finally reacted. Fear rose in his heart. The speed and strength displayed by the guardian just now were much, much stronger than before. Especially the aura that was emitted, it actually pressured him to the point where he could not breathe. Ancestor Lu had a feeling that if he were to face the current guardian, he would definitely die. "Go! I have to go now. Otherwise, I'll die here." Ancestor Lu roared in his heart. Without hesitation, he took out an escape talisman and crushed it. He turned into a ray of bloody light and disappeared on the spot. He directly rushed towards the end of the platform. "Do you think you can escape?" A majestic voice rang out from the explosion of the void bridge, and then a huge hand that blotted out the sky suddenly reached out from the energy and grabbed at the bloody light. The giant hand was too big, and its speed was too fast. In an instant, the fleeing bloody light was caught by the giant hand. Ancestor Lu's expression changed greatly. This escape talisman was a top-grade escape talisman of the Lu Shrine. It was unbelievable that the giant hand had caught up with him in an instant. Damn it! Ancestor Lu's eyes were red. He absolutely could not die here. He had to pass through this checkpoint, obtain the space-time key, and leave this place. Thinking of this, Ancestor Lu's entire body exploded into a bloody mist. This was not crushed by the giant hand, but by Ancestor Lu's own self-destruction. At the moment of Ancestor Lu's self-destruction, a physical body rapidly condensed 1,000 miles away. It was Ancestor Lu. As soon as Ancestor Lu formed, He immediately took out another escape talisman and desperately tried to escape. Unfortunately, the giant hand did not give him a chance and caught him again. However, Ancestor Lu used the same method again. After 10 times in a row, Ancestor Lu's face was pale and he was extremely weak. However, he finally escaped the pursuit of the giant hand and left the platform. Obviously, he had passed through this checkpoint. Of course, although Ancestor Lu had passed, he had paid a great price. At the very least, Ancestor Lu's strength had decreased greatly. It would not be easy for him to recover. Humph! You're running pretty fast. A cold snort suddenly sounded. Then, the energy of the illusory heavenly bridge's self-destruction was instantly annihilated by another more powerful energy. Then, the Guardian's figure appeared again. At this moment, Yao Xiangjuan had already landed beside Zhuan. Her beautiful eyes stared at the Guardian with a dignified and fearful expression. What's going on with this Guardian? How did he become so strong? He's even much stronger than before. Yao Xiangjuan was puzzled. Because this is the true form of this Guardian. This guy is using your strength to break through. Zhuan's eyes were sharp as he said calmly. Break through? Yao Xiangjuan's eyes narrowed as she asked in surprise. That's right. Although the Guardians have strange appearances, they are also cultivating at all times. The Guardian of the 3rd stage is definitely much stronger than the Guardians of the previous 2 stages. Previously, he simply treated you all as training stones, using pressure to complete the final breakthrough. Zhuan sighed in his heart. He had noticed that something was wrong from the beginning. The strength displayed by the Guardian of the 3rd checkpoint was only a little stronger than Sam's. Based on Zhuo Wen's understanding of this stage, the Guardian would only get stronger and stronger. Moreover, the Guardian of the later stage would be much stronger than the previous stage, not just by a little bit. Then what should we do now? Yao Xiangjuan was somewhat at a loss. Her beautiful eyes couldn't help but look at the young man in white beside her, hoping that the young man in white could make a decision. The rest of the people were even more panicked. They were so scared that their faces turned pale. They didn't expect that the Guardian had been pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger. Shen Jian was dead, Lu Zhu had escaped. Now, the only person they could rely on was Yao Xiangjuan. But everyone knew that Yao Xiangjuan's strength was weaker than Lu Zhu and Shen Jian. How could she be a match for the Guardian who suddenly erupted with strength? Zhuo shrugged and said, "Leave this fellow to me to deal with. You step back and stay with everyone." As soon as these words came out, Yao Xiangjuan was stunned. Everyone behind her was also stunned. Although Zhuo had a good performance when dealing with the Yin Wind before, in everyone's view, there was still a big gap between him and Lu Zhu and Shen Jian. Chapter 2342. Kill, Zhun, Ancestor Lu and Shen Jian are no match for this Guardian. We should leave first. Yao Xiangjuan said in a panic. Miss Yao, it's too late to retreat now. This Guardian is very smart. As Zhuan spoke, his eyes intentionally or unintentionally looked at the edge of the platform behind him. At the edge of the platform behind Zhuan, endless Yin winds appeared, completely sealing the entrance of the platform. Yin winds were extremely difficult to deal with, and the amount of Yin winds that appeared at the edge of the platform was too much. Even Zhuan had to go through a lot of trouble to deal with it, not to mention the people behind him who were not very strong. It's over, we're dead for sure this time. Ancestor Lu is too hateful, he actually abandoned us. Sigh, it's too late to say anything, we can't leave. For a time, the surrounding people were filled with sighs and despair. As for Zhuowen's words, no one cared. Ancestor Lu, Shen Jian, and Yao Xiangjuan were not a match for this Guardian even when they joined forces. This white-clothed youth standing out at this moment was just courting death. Yao Xiangjuan sighed softly and said, I'll join forces with you. Since we can't leave, let's fight to the death together. Zhuan turned his head and looked at Yao Xiangjuan with a smile. Miss Yao, we won't die, the one who will die is this Guardian, you. Step back. As he spoke, Zhuan suddenly pulled out the king's sword, took a step forward, and shot out like a stream of light. After the baptism of the second island, Zhuowen's grasp of the space-time law's power had become much stronger. Facing this guardian, although Zhuowen was afraid, it was not to the extent that he would give up without a fight. Yao Xiangjuan stared blankly at the departing figure. At this moment, that figure seemed much taller in her eyes, and the words of Zhuowen before he left kept echoing in her mind. Overestimating yourself. With a sword in his right hand and a shield in his left, the guardian's eyes revealed a touch of disdain as he casually slashed out with his sword. In the guardian's view, except for Ancestor Lu, Xin Jian, and Yao Xiangjuan, who could control space-time, no one here was worthy of his attention. Zhuowen's eyes flashed. It was good that the guardian looked down on him. The moment the guardian's casual sword chi blasted out, Zhuowen's torch dragon wings immediately burst out from his back, and the space-time law erupted from his body. Suddenly he seemed to traverse space-time and disappeared on the spot. When Zhuowen appeared again, he was already in front of the guardian. Then, Zhuowen immediately used the last move of the destruction sword principle, Big Bang technique. Instantly, with Zhuowen as the center, dense invisible ripples spread out, and then the space distorted and collapsed. The gatekeeper looked down on Zhuowen too much, not putting Zhuowen in his eyes at all. At this moment, the creation heaven-cleaving earth enveloped his entire body. Even if he tried to resist, it was already too late. His entire body was bound by the spatial energy that was distorting and collapsing. If it wasn't for the fact that this guardian was too strong, this move of Big Bang would have been enough to tear him to pieces. Boom! In the instant that the guardian was bound, Zhuowen was still above the guardian's head. Without any warning, his right foot smashed into the guardian's chest. The guardian was caught off guard and was directly hit by the foot. Then, his entire body seemed to fall apart as he fell from the sky and smashed onto the ground. At this moment, the scene was terrifyingly quiet. Other than Xiao Lang and a few others who already knew of Zhuowen's strength, the rest were dumbfounded. This guy is so strong. He seems to be stronger than Ancestor Lu and the rest? Ancestor Lu and the rest can make the guardians so miserable, but this person did it. After a moment of silence, the crowd erupted into an uproar like a stormy sea. The despair in everyone's eyes rekindled with the flames of hope. Damn it! I want you dead! The guardian stood up from the bottom of the pit and stared at the white-clothed youth above. He stomped his right foot and rushed over like an arrow leaving the bow. Zhuowen looked at the gatekeeper indifferently. With a wave of his sleeve, he extended his right hand into the air. When the gatekeeper was only a dozen meters away from Zhuowen, Zhuowen's right hand quickly pointed out. In an instant, a terrifying energy ripple erupted. The guardian's body froze for a moment. Then, he realized that the space around him had turned into an endless ocean. There was no end to it. Fear rose in the guardian's heart for no reason. He could feel the smell of death from this vast ocean. Then, at the end of the endless sea, the gatekeeper saw a slowly rising sun. The setting sun, which was supposed to be setting in the west, was now rising from the horizon. It was so strange. When the sun gradually rose, the guardian felt a terrifying power of the space-time rules spread throughout his body. Then, his body began to explode, as if there were countless small bombs hidden in his body. When the crowd at the edge of the platform saw the rising sun, everyone's eyes were filled with awe and respect. This is definitely a space-time law ability. Xiao Lang, why didn't you tell me that Brother Zhuo actually has a space-time law ability? Tang Ruqing's beautiful eyes narrowed. She stared at the rising sun and couldn't help but ask Xiao Lang and the other two beside her. Xiao Lang smiled bitterly. Ruqing, you didn't ask. Otherwise, I would have told you long ago. And Brother Zhuo's space-time law ability is even more powerful than the one in the second trial. Yao Xiangjuan was also extremely shocked. She looked at the rising sun with a complicated expression, as well as the slender figure illuminated by its afterglow. She smiled bitterly and said, "Every time I see Brother Zhuo, I find that his strength is even stronger than before. His progress is just too fast." As the sun rose, bloody mists continued to erupt from the guardian's body. The terrifying space-time power circulated in the guardian's body, causing the guardian's injuries to become more and more terrifying and serious. In the end, the guardian's entire body exploded into several pieces, and bloody mists filled the sky. Little brat, you really hit it well. I'm really unwilling to accept this. The guardian's unwilling voice rang out again, but it soon stopped abruptly as the sun gradually disappeared. Zhuowen slowly landed on the ground and knelt on one knee. He was panting and his face was slightly pale. The power of the ocean's waning sun had indeed increased, but the corresponding consumption was also greater. At this moment, Zhuowen seemed to have been squeezed dry. His whole body was powerless and limp on the ground. Although I created this ability myself, it's a pity that my cultivation level is still too low. The burden of using this ability is too heavy for me. Zhuowen shook his head and immediately took out a praying mat. After laying down restrictions around it, he began to recuperate and recover his energy. Space-time law abilities were generally used by cultivators of the Void Sky 9th step. It wasn't strenuous and could be used however they wanted. However, Zhuowen was only at the Void Sky 7th step. The gap between him and a Void Sky 9th step was not small. Using the space-time law ability was indeed too strenuous. Chapter 2343. Island of Bones. The moment Zhuowen finished off the gatekeeper, everyone behind him fell into a daze. After a long while, one of them said as if he was sleep-talking, "The gatekeeper has been taken care of. Can we go to the third island? We won. We can leave this place. Let's go. Let's hurry to the third island. Who knows, there might be something good there." The cheers were endless. Then, the cultivators rushed to the other side of the platform. Many of the cultivators turned a blind eye to Zhuowen when they passed by him. They didn't even say a word of thanks. Yao Xiangjuan, Tang Ruqing, and Xiao Lang couldn't stand it anymore and scolded the cultivators. Unfortunately, no one listened to their scolding. They all rushed to the end of the platform like crazy. It was as if they would miss some treasure if they were late. Soon, only Yao Xiangjuan, Tang Ruqing, Xiao Lang, Xiao Yin, and Xiao Fu were left on the platform, along with Zhuowen, who was sitting cross-legged and recuperating. These people are too hateful. If it wasn't for Brother Zhuo, how could they have passed the third checkpoint? They didn't even say a word of thanks, Tang Ruqing said with extreme displeasure. Xiao Lang, Xiao Yin, and Xiao Fu were also filled with righteous indignation. Among them, Xiao Lang said, "If I had known, Brother Zhuo wouldn't have killed the gatekeeper. He could have left by himself. Zhuowen wouldn't do that. I know his character. The reason he killed the gatekeeper wasn't for everyone on the island. He did it for his friends, which is you." Yao Xiangjuan sighed. Hearing this, Tang Ruqing, Xiao Lang, and Xiao Lang came to a realization. Then, they looked at Zhuowen with eyes full of gratitude. After Yao Xiangjuan's explanation, they finally understood that Zhuowen had stayed behind to kill the gatekeeper for them and not for those ungrateful people. "Miss Yao, you seem to know Brother Zhuo very well. Could it be that you are his partner?" Tang Ruqing suddenly said in a teasing tone. Xiao Lang and his two brothers also looked at Yao Xiangjuan meaningfully. Whether it was Tang Ruqing, Xiao Lang, or the other two, they all deeply felt Yao Xiangjuan's peerless beauty. As the saying went, a beauty matched a hero. In their eyes, Zhuo Wen and Yao Xiangjuan were a match made in heaven. Yao Xiangjuan was first stunned, and then her pretty face flushed red as she said, "You've misunderstood. I'm not Brother Zhuo's Dao companion, I'm only his friend." "I see. I was rude. Miss Yao, please don't take offense," Tang Ruqing said with a red face. For a moment, the five of them fell into silence. However, the silence between the five was quickly broken by Zhuowen. With a wave of his sleeve, Zhuowen withdrew the restrictions around him and slowly stood up. "Brother Zhuo, are you all right? Your space-time divine ability is very powerful, but the burden on you is not small, right?" Xiao Lang came before Zhuowen and asked with concern. Xiao Lang had guessed that Zhuowen would be extremely weak after using the waning sun of the sea several times. He would need to recover on the spot. "Yes, you don't have to worry about this. Let's go to the third island." After Zhuowen finished speaking, he turned around and walked to the other side of the platform. Xiao Lang and the others quickly followed. However, Yao Xiangjuan gritted her teeth. She saw that Zhuan still did not take the initiative to talk to her, which made her a little annoyed. However, when she remembered that she was now a woman, she also knew that she did not have much interaction with Zhuan. Even if she faced Zhuan, she seemed to have nothing to say. On the other side of the platform, there was a flight of stairs leading down. The 6 of them walked for 2 hours and finally arrived at the end of the stairs. It was still an island, but it was not an ordinary island. It was an island piled with piles of bones. If one looked carefully, the base of the island was actually the skeleton of a huge beast floating on the sea. At a glance, the bones on the island were of humans, beasts, and even unknown species. At least, just by looking at the bones alone, Yun could not help but wonder what species it was. Is this the 3rd island? What does this island have to do with the exit? Tang Ruqing frowned slightly. Yun was also quite puzzled. He immediately turned to look at Yao Xiangjuan and said, "Miss Yao, do you know anything about this place?" The reason why Zhuan asked Yao Xiangjuan was mainly because Yao Xiangjuan came from the 6 Desires Palace. She must have investigated this place in advance. Unexpectedly, Yao Xiangjuan shook her head blankly and said with a wry smile, "I entered the space-time quicksand river mainly for the space-time core. It was also the first time I knew that there was something like the space-time key here, so," Zhuan nodded. It seemed that Yao Xiangjuan did not know how to obtain the space-time key here. "I wonder where Ancestor Lu and those who entered this island before are now?" Xiao Lang suddenly asked. Zhuo Wen's eyes flickered as his divine sense suddenly shot out. However, at the instant his divine sense shot out, a terrifying roar that shook the heavens and the earth resounded in his mind. This roar carried an astonishing tearing force. His sea of consciousness almost collapsed under this roar. Zhuan took a deep breath and hurriedly withdrew his divine sense. His face was pale and blood flowed from the corner of his mouth. Zhuowen's abnormal state immediately attracted the attention of Yao Xiangjuan and the others. "Brother Zhuo, what's the matter?" Yao Xiangjuan asked nervously. Zhuan wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth and waved his hand to indicate that he was fine. He said, "I just extended my divine sense to explore this island, but it was obstructed. This island is completely different from the previous 2 islands. I feel that this island is filled with a violent aura. We must be careful," Yao Xiangjuan said solemnly. Tang Ruqing and the others also nodded. Not only Yao Xiangjuan, but they also felt that something was wrong with this island. As for what exactly was wrong, they could not tell. "Let's go. Let's go to the center of the island," Zhuan said. The others nodded without any objections and followed Zhuan. They knew that Zhuowen's purpose for going to the center of the island should be for the reward of the 3rd level. There was still a stone pillar in the center of the island, but this stone pillar was somewhat different from the previous 2 islands. This stone pillar was made of bones mixed with stone. The moment they arrived at the center of the island, the 6 of them stopped and looked at the scene in the center of the island. Around the bone pillar in the center of the island, there were corpses that had not yet turned cold. Zhuan looked carefully and found that these corpses were all the cultivators that followed from the 2nd island. Zhuan even saw an acquaintance among these corpses. And this acquaintance was none other than the slightly fat cultivator. The slightly fat cultivator lay not far from the bone pillar, his eyes full of fear. On the chest of the slightly fat cultivator, a fist-sized wound had exploded. At this moment, the wound was still bleeding strangely. The other people's deaths were not much different from this slightly fat cultivator. Basically, their chests were opened with fist-sized wounds, and the wounds were bleeding black blood. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.